Stand for the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time we allow the public to read something from the floor that's not on the agenda, and if you want something, you're limited to 5 minutes. Not on the agenda.
Sorry.
Something is not on the agenda.
Well, I don't know if you're presenting.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, so-
unless you want to talk about something that's not represented, you would just wait for your hearing. Okay. All right, good evening, Planning Commission. Thank you, Stephen Toskey, citizen of St. Helens. Wanted to come to talk to you in advance about something that's actually gonna happen tomorrow night, which is the joint City Council Planning Commission meeting about land use decisions. And I think that I have several concerns about it. Bottom line is I've read the report. It looks like the recommendation is to try to shift light industrial commercial, which has no really support for, there's no justification in it. It just kind of looks like a guess. And there's a lot of risk in doing that because where we have mixed use, we can have low income housing be built, and there is a lot of push from the legislature to require the government sell property to low income housing developers, particularly nonprofits. And I think we've got a good amount of low income housing, and certainly, so, you know, this is a commission, this is supposed to be a meeting about economic development of our city, economic vitality and land use planning. And so I don't like where this thing is headed, because this company, when I looked at this company's website when this process first started, it looked like they kind of really had a lot of things that were tied to development of kind of higher density, lower income stuff. Not that I'm against low income housing, but I think I've said this publicly before, I think we're already hitting above our belt line there. I think we need to be looking for ways to get, you know, working class folks here, jobs here. And what's the way to do that? I have a personal opinion. My opinion is to try to get more untethered workers, people who already have good jobs that want to come to our town for the wonderful things that we have to offer. Safe streets, wonderful, beautiful places, parks, good schools. Those are things that people are looking for, and we don't have enough housing for people who can actually afford pretty good homes to come here to do it. So I don't like the way that I think that, I guess I'm gonna encourage the planning commission to feel one of the things that is to feel your own power and to ask for your own direction. And to say to the city council tomorrow that we would like to have this land use planning people, we want to stop their process, which appears to be headed toward adoption of some kind of regulation. Jessica Chilton, Councilor Chilton said at the beginning, we don't have to adopt these things, but they're heading it toward in that direction. And some of the things that problems we need to solve are going to be the land use right down here on the waterfront. And what are we gonna do about parking? How much density are we gonna have here? What is gonna be our ratio between commercial and residential? Where are people gonna park? Do we need parking garages? How do we solve the problem when developers are gonna come in? And the idea was, I think, originally, we're just gonna want one big developer to solve all our problems. Well, maybe we're gonna get that, maybe we're not. Tonight on the agenda is something that some of these problems are gonna emerge, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. But get pushed toward, let's develop a 200-foot by 200-foot lot. We definitely have lots that can be developed here. And what are we gonna do about parking? What's gonna be our overall? And these are the things that we need to plan carefully and make sure that we do a good job on them. I've lived in places where there is no parking. And it makes a huge difference in the livability of a place, and it makes a huge difference for the people that are trying to run businesses. So I'm greatly encouraging the planning commission to try to have a discussion with the city council and say, we really want to start studying this parking situation. I actually talked to Jacob a bit about it. Maybe that'll come up later about some of the studies we've done. We could use some money to update some things like that. So I think resisting the idea of we're gonna get a presentation, then we're gonna move forward with adopting more mixed use housing instead of more mixed use land use instead of light industrial. It was a bad idea anyway, could have some unintended consequences. But we have some greater needs of focus here. So that's what I wanted to say and encourage you to take a very hard look at those materials and be ready for tomorrow night. Thank you.
Someone else have wanted to talk about not on the agenda? Thank you. Oh, we still have the minutes from last month. Do we have any questions about them or corrections?
I have one minor correction on page 7. Right above where it says motion, the applicant to provide the. I think the intention is city photos. That it says site, CITE.
Okay. Any other corrections, minor or otherwise? Do we have a motion to accept the minutes with this small change?
Make motion. Second.
Seconded. Any vote?
I'd be voting, I left in the middle of the group before the meeting was over. Aye.
Aye.
Voting here.
Okay. Thank you. The time is now 6:07 PM. The public hearing is now open. This quasi judicial land use hearing. This is a quasi judicial land use hearing. The subject of this hearing is a request for a variance. The subject property is identified in the county assessor's map as lots 300 and 401 on map 4N1W3BD. The applicant will, Ubelacker. The owner is Columbia Assets Group LLC. Because quasi judicial proceedings require the observance of certain procedural formalities, we'll take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the commission wish to declare a actual conflict of interest or bias in this matter? How about turn that story really? Seeing no conflict. Does any member of the commission wish to declare an ex parte communications or site visits?
I do, I had a conversation with Mr. Toshke regarding this project, but it didn't affect my opinion at all.
Right. Does anyone from the audience object to the ability of the commissioner to make a fair decision? None. Generally, the order of proceedings will be as follows. Required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, neutral testimony, those opposed, rebuttal by applicant, final questions, close of the record, deliberations, and decision. The following statements are required to be made at the commencement of the hearing pursuant to the city code ORS 197.7975. The following is a list of the applicable substantive criteria for this decision. City of Sin Homes Municipal Code 17.108.0501 criteria for granting a variance. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria as described. Further criteria in the comprehensive plan or land use regulation which the person believes applies to the decision. Failure to raise an issue, including constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval in this hearing, in person or in writing, or failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority an opportunity to respond to the issue, precludes appeal to LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals, on that issue, and precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as Chair Carey mentioned, we're looking at a variance tonight, and I think most people in the room probably know this property, but I'll describe it here briefly. So the subject property is actually two separate lots. One fronts Strand Street, which is pictured here in 2014. Previously, it was used as an annex building for an antique shop, which was located next door in the main floor of the Morgus building. The back lot fronts South First Street, and there's a photo I'll show you of that in just a second. So the variance tonight is to allow a reduction in the required off-street parking required. And the big distinction is that tonight we're not looking at the land use decision for the use of the property. Tonight, we're focused on the variance for off-street parking. The applicant, say they were granted this variance or some version of the variance, they would still have to come before the planning department and apply for their land use permit for the use of the property. So whether that's a site development review or conditional use permit, we don't know yet, but that's subsequent to this decision. And the reasoning for that is that if they weren't granted this variance, it could change their development proposal quite substantially. So they're kind of phasing their approval approach. So as I mentioned, it's two lots. The total size is about 11,500 square feet. So there's some photos here to give you some background information. So this is from 2014, before the city started our infrastructure project. This is today in 2024. You can see the city's working on some infrastructure improvements, utility improvements in the roadway. And then here's what the building looks like today from Strand. Okay, so in 2019, a demolition permit was issued for the building, and in that demo permit, the scope of work generally was to remove siding, predominantly on the south wall here. And the idea was that they wanted to expose dry rot, so that the owner could tell if they could still repair the building and actually salvage what was there. So this demo permit was issued. Some of the work was completed, but ultimately this permit expired and the building remained in sort of its half demolished form, through today. The building official noted that this probably quickened the deterioration of the building, because it was in its half demolished state for so many years. So this is when the siding was removed on that south wall in 2020. And at that point, the city had initiated our infrastructure project, and the contractor was very worried about doing infrastructure work in proximity to this building because it looked like it was potentially going to collapse or injure workers. So they feared for the safety. And so at that point in August 2023, another building permit was issued to shore up the south wall, the south wall here. And so that work was completed and inspected in September of 2023. And at that time, the building official had a condition that said the temporary shoring supporting that wall was approved for use no more than 1 year from the completion. So basically that shoring was intended just to keep it for a year. And after that, no longer. So that's kind of some background on the building's condition. This is the back lot that faces South First Street. So you can see the Morgus building next door. Here's the annex, the antique annex, and in the background here, the weeds have kind of overgrown, so you can't quite see it. And I'll just point out while this picture is up, the city also has infrastructure improvements on its back side. So on South First Street, there's also frontage improvements that are planned to be installed. Okay. So let's see, I'll start with just a quick description of the project. So let me get to the right page here. Don't mind me, I'll make you dizzy. And I'm going to share screen too. I forgot to do that for the people at home. So the proposal itself, so like I mentioned, the applicant's variance is based on a concept plan, which will then have to go through subsequent land use approval. So the concept is, it's a 4-story building, it's got 16 residential dwelling units, 8 of which are 1-bedrooms and 8 of which are lofts. On the south, on the Strand Street side, the first floor contains 2 commercial suites, which they're proposing eating and drinking establishments. So this is the floor plan. You can see on the Strand Street side, here's the 2 commercial suites. And then on the ground floor, they're proposing some parking. So it would be a ground floor parking lot. And then on the second floor, here's the residential units, the 1-bedrooms. And then on the third floor, more residential units. And on the fourth floor, more residential units. And then they're also proposing kind of a rooftop shared recreation area. So criteria that apply to this. So our off-street parking requirements. So there's a couple that come into play here. So our residential parking requirements are important. So we've got studio, which requires 1 space per unit. And then 1-bedrooms, which require 1.5 spaces per unit. The important part about that is that our code does not have a separate use category for lofts. So one of the questions for the commission is a loft considered a studio or is a loft considered a 1-bedroom? Because it makes a difference in what parking requirements we apply to it. And you know, one thing that staff noticed is that the lofts vary in square footage from about 800 square feet to about 1,000, while the 1-bedrooms are about 560 to 674. So the 1-bedrooms are actually smaller than these lofts, and the lofts, as the applicant's interpreting it, are considered studios, which require less parking. So it's kind of a weird thing. You know, I'm sure you're all familiar with a loft, but the bedroom is upstairs and open down to below. So there isn't technically a room that closes. So you can make the argument it's like a studio. If you have thoughts about that, I think if you have any strong opinions about that and want to provide guidance to staff as we review this in the future, let us know. Okay, so how many parking spaces are required for this development? So we've got the 2 eating and drinking establishments, which require 1 space per 50 square feet of dining area, plus 1 space for every 2 employees. So the commercial side, that's cut and dry, that requires 32 spaces. So 32 spaces are required for 2 restaurants on the ground floor as proposed. For the residential units, it's either 20 spaces using the studio calculation, or it's 24 spaces using the 1-bedroom calculation. So there's either a total of 52 spaces needed or 56 spaces needed, depending on how the commission views these lofts. So what are they providing? So as I mentioned, there's some parking spaces provided on site. So the parking garage, we'll call it, is accessed off South First Street through a shared access easement here, and then you enter and there's 7 spaces provided. And there's 2 kind of special parking provisions in this zoning district. And one of them allows the applicant to utilize on-street parking to count towards their off-street parking requirements. So we get to look at what on-street parking is available in the right-of-way abutting the site. So here we can see that there are 4 diagonal spaces on Strand Street and 2 parallel spaces on South First Street. There's additional on-street parking here, but I've redlined that to show that the improvements that the city is doing stops at this building right here. So these will be done as part of the future development of the waterfront site, but they are not being done as part of this existing infrastructure project. And so, you know, I just wanted to point that out, that showing them on here, that is not part of the city's infrastructure project at this time. It could be years. I also wanted to point out that the applicant talks about parking across the street on Strand. And it mentions that, no building development will occur on Strand Street across from tax lot 300. That's the city-owned property right here, and there's nothing in our city framework, waterfront framework plan that says a building can't be built there. There's also nothing that says open space requirements, event space don't have additional parking demand. So I want to point out that like, there could be additional demand on what is city-owned property across from this site. So, utilizing these spaces isn't necessarily, that's not what the code allows us to do. So I mentioned there's two special parking provisions in the zoning district. One is that right of way parking on street counts towards the off-street requirements. The other is that we don't want to penalize existing buildings for new development. So I'm going to read this out loud because it's important. The applicant will probably talk about it in their presentation, and it's important that we understand what this provision allows. So in the Riverfront District, and I'm on page 5 of the staff report if you want to read along, it's section 4K, kind of in the middle of the page. It says no additional or new on-site parking is required for sites with lawfully existing building footprint coverage in excess of 50% of the lot area. Change of use or remodeling without a change to the existing footprint of lawfully existing buildings are also exempt. So what that's intended to count towards is if you have a building that takes up the entire lot and you want to change the use inside that existing building, you're not penalized to change the use. You don't have to provide a parking lot when you don't have space to provide a parking lot. The applicant on pages sheets A3 and A4 makes this argument that if they were to just build on top of that existing building, that they wouldn't have to provide any off-street parking. They're making that argument here. And staff wanted to point out a couple of big, flaws in this argument. One is that it requires an existing lawful building footprint. So this back portion is no longer there and wouldn't count towards an existing lawful building footprint. In addition, the definition of a building is a structure having a roof supported by columns or walls. So if this roof were removed, you no longer have a building. And does this apply? And so, adding multiple stories, it's questionable if this would even apply. And staff just wanted to point out that there could be flaws in this argument. And I think that's all I want to say on that for now. The applicant will probably talk about it more. So back to the question, how many spaces are they providing? So they're showing 7 on site, plus they get to count the on street. So they're providing a total of 13 spaces. And how many do they need? 52 or 56, depending on how you're interpreting loft. So just to conclude, the variance request tonight is either a 43 space variance request or a 39 space variance request, which is about a 75% reduction in the off-street parking requirement. And I want to point out a couple comments we received. So as with all variances, we send them out for referral comments. The first one we got back was from our city engineering department. So our engineering manager commented, and you can see that comment on page 4 of the staff report. Our engineering manager noted that there's a lack of parking and that parking congestion in this area in particular is a daily occurrence. She noted that this is often where community events are held, and that when the Riverwalk project is built, even more visitors will be drawn to the area. She pointed out we don't have a developed transit system, and so a lot of these residents that live here would have cars and want to park them. And she recommended requiring a developer to provide a minimum of 55 to 60% of the parking spaces required, or denial. We also received an email from Carl Kaufman. So Carl Kaufman owns the Waterside Lofts, which is this building here on the corner of Cowlitz and Strand. You all should have received an email copy of that and then a physical copy in front of you. And then most recently, within the last couple of hours, we've received an email from Aaron Salisbury. So Aaron owns this building right here on the corner of future Wilkama Way and South First Street. And Aaron is daunted by being next to a 4-story building, but ultimately she's in support of the application. And you should have a copy of her letter. So that's it for my presentation.
So we have time for the applicant to make a presentation.
My name is William Blocker. I apologize for any overlap in the presentation. I didn't know Jenny would cover a few of my slides. That's welcome. We start at the top.
Direct me how you want to go through this.
And if I'm speaking too fast, please slow me down. I've been timing myself, so this should take 20 minutes. I want to get through it rapidly so we can have good stuff. So thank you, Planning Commission, for taking the time to hear about our variance requests as it relates to an exciting new and prospective project. We look forward to hearing your feedback as well as the communities, as we know how critical parking is and can be for many residents. We also recognize that Old Town is at a pivotal moment in its existence and experiencing growing pains with the current construction of the waterfront development. The ongoing infrastructure has the capacity to bring economic growth to the community with new developable land, improved roads, sidewalks, and additional off-street parking. I say capacity because economic growth and success is never guaranteed, as zoning codes can choke development with antiquated or staunch guidelines that fail to see common sense in future gains. We are hoping that the commission and the community look to the future benefits of what this project has to offer and to understand what exemptions are currently attached with the existing building, as Jenny has pointed out. The map on the left identifies the two properties in question as part of the proposed development. Tax lot 300 on the east, right, faces Strand Street and has an existing building that occupies more than 50% of the lot. Tax lot 401 on the left, west, faces South First Street and currently has no building. There's a shared access easement being implemented between the neighbor to the north, Klondike, for the purpose of reducing multiple curb cuts on South First Street, thereby maximizing the number of on-street parallel parking spaces. Map on the right shows the site location in relation to the ongoing waterfront development that is well underway. The site is prominently located between the Old Town to the north and the future waterfront development to the south. Next slide. The site plan on the left juxtaposes the existing structures adjacent to the owner's property with the current street improvements overlaid. Note that angled parking will remain along Strand Street with additional 90-degree parking spaces adjacent to the waterfront. On South First Street, there will be parallel parking spaces adjacent to tax lot 401. Photos on the right show the existing structure located on tax lot 300. There is no historical value to this structure, and while the lower photo may look auspicious, additional shoring has been added to the interior side of the south-facing wall for additional support, completed in August 23. This was only seen as temporary shoring in the eyes of the city and started a year countdown to a more permanent solution. We've been working with the city during the last year to come to a resolution on how to move forward, and an opportunity presented itself with the possible acquisition of the corner property located just south of tax lot 300 that could be used for parking purposes. This was discovered in December, and it wasn't until 4 months later did we receive an answer from the city that they are unwilling to sell. These were 4 costly months that have led to this moment. Regardless, the presence of an existing lawful structure has an important value to this project and should not be overlooked even in its current state. Next slide. What we'll detail in the next two slides is entirely allowable within the zoning code and is a viable path forward the owner could take without any variance requests. In detailing this path forward, it'll be used as comparison to our proposed project to better understand the parking variance requests and where we are coming from. According to Development Code 1732-172 4K, I'll refer to this as subsection 4K hereafter. There's an exception to the parking requirement stating that no new on-site parking is required with an existing building footprint that covers in excess 50% of the lot area. Now, as Jane pointed out, whether that back additional area that's not shown is not part of this is irrelevant because it doesn't skew the numbers to a degree that it affects our further calculations. The change of use or remodeling without changing the footprint of the existing building is exempt from the parking requirement. This means that a change of use on the ground floor commercial spaces highlighted in blue could be occupied with the highest use eating and or drinking establishments calculated at 1 parking space per 50 square feet of establishment's dining area. The industry standard for dining to kitchen area ratios is about 60% dining area, 30% kitchen, and 10% storage, utilities, restrooms. This means that the parking requirement for the north tenant with a total square footage of 1,458 square feet times 60% with the addition of 3 employees comes to 21 parking spaces. The south tenant is 1,941 square feet times 60% with 3 staff comes to 27 parking spaces. The total commercial parking exempt is 48 spaces. Still within the rights of subsection 4K and based on residential density requirements of 1 unit per 500 square feet of enclosed ground floor space, the existing building square footage of 3,627 square feet allows a total of 7 residential units that could be built above the commercial ground floor space. Residential areas highlighted in orange above the blue. These units could be maximized as 2-bedroom units, but in the interest of a fair comparison for our variance request, we will calculate the residential units as 1 bedrooms, calculated at 1.5 parking spaces for 1 bedroom unit. The total parking demand for residential units comes to 11 total spaces. The combined parking demand for residential and commercial units just for tax lot 300 that is exempt due to subsection 4K is 59 parking spaces. The phase 1 development of tax lot 300 has a parking demand of 59 spaces that is completely within our legal right and within the zoning development code. Our parking variance request is only for 43 parking spaces, and that is for tax lot 300 and 401 combined. Next slide, please. In the separate phase, a new building occupying tax lot 401 would be subject to the off-street parking requirements as no building exists, and subsection 4K cannot be applied. In this scenario, a new residential building could be erected by placing parking on the main level and building 2 to 3 stories of residential units above. Tax lot 400 is larger than tax lot 300, and for the purposes of calculating residential density standards, we'll assume the same size as tax lot 300, although there's a 24-foot access path being used for circulation. The total density used is 4,720 square feet divided by 500 equals 9.4 or 9 residential units allowed. If 9 studio units were placed above the ground floor, this would require 9 parking stalls that can be provided as shown with one-way traffic. By meeting the exception for tax lot 300 in phase 1 and building tax lot 401 as a separate phase, this scenario would provide 2 commercial ground floor units zoned to accommodate eating and or drinking establishments, including a total of 16 residential units, 9 of which would be required to provide off-street parking. The building provides for a total of 59 parking spaces exempt. Next slide. In the following pages, we'll detail our proposed project and how it is nearly identical to the building just outlined. The items on this page are the community development code criteria and how our project is meeting the demands for height limitations, landscaping areas, refused areas, buffering and screening, shared outdoor recreation areas, open space requirements. The only item not met is the parking demand, as we believe subsection 4K should be applied to our proposal for a new build that is nearly identical to a phased approach in both commercial square footages and residential units and unit counts. So Jenny did touch on this a little bit, so I won't take up too much of your time so we can keep going forward. But basically, the site provides 7 parking spaces, 4 standard, 2 are hybrid parking spots, and 1 van accessible. And then there are 6 off-street parking that are adjacent to the property. And what I'm calling unclaimed adjacent spots, there are 6 across in Strand Street. As is being annotated there. Okay, so next slide. The plan at the top shows the ground floor and how it relates to the street context. So we have the 24-foot shared access aisle at the top. The green is showing the open space and landscaping requirements. 10% of the site needs to be open space, 15% landscaping. And I'll show later on that we're meeting that 50% by also having some landscaping on the rooftop garden. And we're also proposing 2 commercial spaces similar to the existing structure with a north and south tenant. We are also providing a common corridor for these spaces with shared bathrooms. And the ground level also includes elevator and stair access to the residential floors and the rooftop. We are showing the commercial space as eating and or drinking, and or drinking establishments to show the greatest use possible for parking purposes. However, it may be that only one restaurant would occupy the space and a retail or coffee shop may occupy the other. Or 2 general retail stores or offices may occupy both tenants, having an even lower parking demand. So the bottom drawing shows a second level plan that consists of 1-bedroom units for a total of 8 units. The second level units overlap the parking area and commercial spaces below. The building jogs along the exterior in order to meet the development code, requiring an 8-foot recess for every 30 feet in building length, breaking up the building mass. The building is generally laid out so that unit services are central and stacked with the utilization of building shafts for plumbing and exhaust efficiencies. This frees up more exterior wall space for windows and views of the surrounding area. Moving up to level 3, these 8 units are studio units complete with lofts or mezzanines. It would be wrong to consider these as 1-bedrooms, as the mezzanine is open to the floor below and not enclosed. The building code requires the mezzanine to be open to the floor below and further regulates the mezzanine size to a maximum 1/2 of the base floor area that is open to the level above when provided with sprinklers, as the building would provide. The studio lofts will have double height spaces that take advantage of the river views and provide larger living spaces for the tenants as opposed to the 1-bedrooms located on the second level. The 2 units on either end of the building will have exterior covered decks that are a prominent feature on the street facing facades. As part of the development code, shared outdoor space is required for the tenants based on the type of units in the building. For the studio up to 2-bedroom units, 200 square feet is required per unit for a total of 3,200 square feet. At either end of the building, additional landscaping adds a buffer between the street-facing facades and the shared outdoor rooftop. 2 stair towers and an elevator provide the required egress components necessary for rooftop access. The shaft exhaust stacks are called out and cluster the stair or elevator towers where possible. The exception are the 2 central stacks located near the center of the building. The roof outlines above are shown as dashed and minimal in sizing, though large enough to protect from weather entering the building. The section drawing below shows the configuration with the parking. On the lower level, the commercial ground floor as well, and then the 1-bedroom units are on the second level, and then the lofts are on the the third, and they show the double height spaces. Next slide. All right, so this is the proposed Strand Street facing facade with material studies. To meet the guidelines of the architectural character review, large window glazing is located at the 2 main entrances to the building. The main level limestone or basalt veneer follows the urban edge created by the neighboring buildings, while the brick finished in an antique red brings the eye vertical with a triple height colonnade facade framing the entrances and level 2 decks. Parapet and cornice adorned with rooftop landscaping create a buffer between the rooftop patio and street below. The loft units on the 3rd level have a covered exterior deck that overlook either street. Next slide. This aerial view looking southeast shows a parking entrance with landscape screening from the streets and adjacent properties. The 2 brick colonnades bookend the structure, while simplified building fenestrations identify living space for the units for the bulk of the building. Meeting the architectural character review guidelines, the remainder of the building will be finished in painted wood siding. The building mass is softened using pitched roofs at the 2 center residential blocks on either side of the building, including above the commercial space where the building is stepped back. Windows are vertically oriented And follow the guidelines of twice as tall as wide where possible, which is shown on the lower elevation drawing. And the top right elevation shows the Strand Street facade elevation as it relates to the architectural review guidelines. You can see the metal awning system above the entry with transom windows above and tenant signage illuminated with Old Town gooseneck wall sconces. A mid-bell cornice at the second story doubles as a decorative windowsill that separates the ground floor commercial space from the residential units above. The brick colonnade connects the two spaces with brick pilasters at the first level before extending vertically to frame the residential units above. The roof overhangs are visible, though are set back from the edge as shown in the section elevation at the bottom right. Windows are single hung where possible, except the use of casement windows in bedrooms for proper egress sizing. The south elevation shows the minimum rooftop coverings that are limited to providing coverage at the elevator and stair tower entrances and exits. Due to the rooftop occupancy, chimney exhaust stacks must terminate 7 feet above the occupied surface, terminating just above the rooftop coverings and are grouped for a total of 3 flat roofs. Here we can see the 2 brick colonnade bookends with rooftop landscaping. The pitch standing seam metal roof screen the rooftop mechanical units beyond. Parking lot is also screened with the use of landscaping from the neighboring properties. The maximum building height is 45 feet, though projections not used for human habitation are allowed, including chimneys, elevator shaft housing, stair towers, and other similar objects not used for human occupancy. And these black and white aerial perspectives better show the previously mentioned items, including the relationship between the rooftop access and minimal roof coverings, better shown in the lower left image. The Strand Street perspective in the bottom right shows how vertically oriented and grouped windows are used for the double height loft units that face the Columbia River. And this is the last slide. As mentioned, there are 8 one-bedroom units on the second level that require 1.5 spaces for each unit for a total of 12 parking spaces. The studio loft units require 1 space per unit for a total of 8 parking spaces. The residential units require a total of 20 parking spaces. For the ground floor commercial, the north and south tenants are nearly identical in size. For eating and or drinking establishments, this has the highest parking demand as it requires 1 space per 50 square feet of dining area plus 1 space for every 2 employees. Based on the provided layout, the dining area is about 760 square feet for each, plus 3 staff, requiring 18 parking spaces per commercial tenant. This is the greatest parking demand that can be placed on the commercial building occupancies. This does not mean that 2 restaurant tenants will occupy the same space, meaning the actual parking demand could be significantly less depending on the tenants. The total parking demand that includes the commercial and retail spaces is 56 parking spaces. With the provided off-street parking spaces of 7 stalls and the on-street parking spaces of 6 for a total of 13 provided. This brings the parking variance request down to 43 total spaces. If counting the unclaimed adjacent parking spaces across the street on Strand, this would bring the total down to 37 parking spaces. In a scenario where only 1 tenant is a restaurant, the other is a general retail sales, the parking demand would be 29, as the retail sales and service calculated at 1 space per 400 square feet gross floor area would only require 4 parking spaces and not 18. So if 1 is a restaurant and 1 is general retail, our parking variance is only asking for 29. So I ask that you consider that if you were not granting full variance, that a partial variance, that's where you would like. What we are asking for in this parking variance is well within the zoning framework as provided in subsection 4K of the development code that allows for a building remodel or change of occupancy with an existing structure. We are asking that this exemption be applied to a new building construction rather than spending extensive resources to remodel a dilapidated structure. This would require 2 building permits in a phased approach and prolong the building construction process that is already exacerbated by the infrastructure development in progress. The proposed single building new construction only requires a parking variance of 43 spaces, while a phased approach has a much higher demand of 59 parking spaces that would be allowable under the guise of subsection 4K. Doing a phase 2 building approach is well within the legal framework of the building and zoning code, but it doesn't create a better building for the community. It requires keeping a structure that has no historical value and costs more to repair than to rebuild. St. Helens, the planning commission, and the community need to acknowledge that economic growth cannot happen without some flexibility, or without recognizing the shortcomings of the zoning code and its failure to modernize. In this specific case, applying the parking exemption of an existing building to the proposed new construction that is identical in ground floor commercial tenants and residential unit counts. We are not asking for special privileges. We are asking for recognition of an existing building code exemption to be applied to an identical albeit new build. The current zoning code is restrictive in that any future new construction will be required to build parking lots that occupy 75% or more of the land for a small-sized restaurant. Is this the look the community wants? Small box stores with big parking lots. The renderings of the waterfront development that were sold to the community are not achievable as they completely ignored the parking demands brought on by the zoning code. Instead, the developers will be punished for any proposed project as the city has failed to provide any sort of parking structure or mass transit solution. Providing on-street parking spaces as part of the waterfront development is the bare minimum, when public parking facilities should have been included in the waterfront community planning events. This oversight should not be passed down to the developers who are trying to fulfill the city's vision. Fulfill the city's vision for a reinvigorated Old Town community. This building has the potential to serve as a bookend between Old Town and the new waterfront expansion, a bookend between past and present, demonstrating to developers that the city is willing to work and negotiate for a better community for residents, business owners, and employees. Let's use common sense when interpreting development code, as life has a tendency to move quicker than the pen. Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant? Thank you. Do we have anybody in support of the application who would like to testify? Anybody with neutral testimony, not in favor nor against, but something to say about it. Anyone in opposition to the application would like to come forward? We'll start in the back.
Jerry Eisenzimmer.
Go up to the table. Better catch the mic. You can just state your name.
Jerry Eisenzimmer. 105 Cowlitz. We live down here and there's already no parking available. We've got 3 restaurants and then the Arcadia Hotel. People are constantly parking in my driveway or blocking it just from what's here now. So I don't see how you can give them 50 parking spots that don't exist. You know, what's it gonna do for the rest of the area? The other thing, I'm a retired fire department. And there used to be a 3-floor limit on construction because the fire department couldn't access anything higher. And if you go to the 4th floor, they still don't have a truck higher. So anybody trapped on the 4th floor is gonna be dead. Unless they can jump out the window. Or if the building's sprinkled, but even that isn't a guarantee they get out. So it takes $750,000 for a new ladder truck.
Could you put up the map of cities so we can see where you live?
In the house on the corner with the big magnolia tree.
Amy George House, yeah.
Across to the west. Right. Okay. Anything else?
That's it.
Any questions?
I've got one of my driveway with something different, but my one driveway on First Street's inaccessible. It's got a ditch dug across the front of it. I want to get a dump truck in with some mulch this week and can't get across that 2-foot ditch. So
Sorry.
maybe they can do something temporary. Thank you.
Anyone else in opposition? I'll really hand over here.
So, first of all, Stephen Toski, St. Helens, and, I want to say that when I met with Jennifer about this, I was neutral and decided I wanted, and I thought I would come here neutral, but after taking a harder look at this thing, I'm gonna come out as opposed because, the applicant has not met any of the legal criteria for the variance requested. And first of all, I like the look of the project. I think your presentation is excellent. And I also agree with a lot of the things that the applicant has stated about some of the issues. And this kind of dovetails into some of the things I said in my initial comments. And that is, we're behind on planning what we're gonna do about parking downtown as this development. As we get more residential development, more commercial development, we really don't have a comprehensive game plan about how we're gonna deal with this. And so what a developer is left with is being stuck between, I'd like to make this development, but I don't have enough parking. And so I think that as a planning commission, there are a lot of ways to handle this. One is denial. One is, another is to, and I think that's something to ask Jacob and Jenny about. I did ask Jacob about some of the planning for parking downtown. And he pulled up a was it the 2012 discussion about parking down there when the thing was originally being planned, and then the overall structure. But right now, I think we've been thinking we're gonna get a single developer to come in and do this whole thing for us. And they're gonna plan and make parking how we want it. So right now, we're looking at a developer who wants to develop these lots and doesn't have nearly enough parking, not even close. And so the question is, do they meet the criteria? The answer is, the criteria are at 17.108.0501. Proposed variance will not be significantly detrimental in its consequence to the overall purposes of the code. Be in conflict with the applicable policies of the comprehensive plan, any other applicable policies and standards of this code, and be significantly detrimental in its consequences to other properties in the same zoning district or vicinity. It doesn't meet any of those criteria. The proposed variance will be significantly detrimental in its consequence to the overall purposes of the code. The purpose of the code is for there to be enough parking. And you just heard somebody who lives down here, and I live here, and there isn't enough parking. And what happens is that when you have not enough parking for residential, and this is just assuming one car is going to be parked for every one of these units that's going to be rented, you end up with blocks and blocks and blocks of not enough parking. And so the other applicable policies and standards of the codes are violated because it really doesn't take into account any of the other buildings or what's going to happen there. If we allow an exception here like this, every single developer that's going to come along is going to want the same kind of thing. And if we grant the same kind of thing to every other developer, what we're going to end up with is no parking down here. Nobody's going to be able to, you're not going to be able to park your car to live where you need to live, let alone to park your car to shop at a restaurant or go to a store. So I think, what I'm urging the planning commission to do as part of this discussion with this developer, who I think has come with a very viable project, energetic project, is to try and find solutions of how we deal with that. And these are things for you to discuss and maybe for tomorrow to discuss with these other folks. Where are we going to have parking? And so there are special circumstances that exist that are peculiar to the lot size or shape. No, there are no special circumstances that exist. The use that proposed will be the same as permitted under this code, and city standards will be maintained to the greatest extent that is reasonably possible while permitting some economic use of the land. No, that's not meant either. What you're going to have is two very large kind of commercial spaces along with this residential development that potentially could put many parking spaces, especially if you're going to have restaurants there and nobody's going to have a place to park. And the problem with that is that nobody has a place to park, then nobody comes to the restaurant, then nobody comes to the restaurant. And what you end up with is a bunch of boarded up restaurants because nobody will come there because they don't have a place to park. The existing physical harm and natural systems such as but not limited to traffic, drainage will not be adversely affected. No, all of those things will be adversely affected because if you add this many folks and this much parking for this building, it will adversely affect all of the people that already don't have enough parking down here. And E, the hardship is not self-imposed. It is a self-imposed hardship because the developer could have made this an entirely residential development. And what I see it a lot where I've lived in places that have or much smaller commercial footprints, maybe a small office somewhere or two. Maybe the idea of having a couple restaurants is not a good idea here. What should be occurring is on the first floor level, all of it is used for parking. Instead, what they're using the first floor for is commercial space. So that is a self-imposed thing. They want to rent out commercial space and not have enough parking. So they don't meet any of the criteria. And what I see envisioning occurring is this same problem occurring over and over again downtown. The next person that comes along and wants to develop the next block, it's gonna have exactly the same. And that's why I agree with, it's not achievable under some of the laws. And so I think the city should be finding solutions. And I think these solutions should be discussed within this commission and questioning of our commissioners, discussions with the applicant. Like, for example, can that city property be freed up? Where can we build parking? Maybe the kind of discussion that we should be having is, do we need a parking garage? So when developers come in and say, hey, look, I want to shed 20 spaces. I want to have 25 spaces. I want to shed 25 spaces off of my project, the city can say, okay, that's going to cost you X dollars because we're going to build a parking garage. And then you will be able to park your cars in this city parking garage. These are things that need to be discussed in an overall comprehensive discussion of number of potential residential units, number of potential commercial units. How do we deal with this? We have a developer who's come in here with a very nice project. It says, none of this makes sense to us. We cannot make this fit. And I think even on the even if they went complete parking on the first floor, I'm not sure how much closer that would get to them. That is not their proposal. As much as I love the idea of developing there, I'm super excited about it. I regret having to say, you should deny this because it doesn't meet the proofs. I am wondering if there is room for further discussion because I don't think a decision needs to be made until September. And those are really kind of things that I think you're going to look for guidance to staff from. As far as the claim that the existing footprint can be used, that's not really the intent of the code. Okay, when we go back to our criteria. Our code is not to be used. We're going to bootstrap in these two things so we can kind of get 7 spaces off there. Plus, I do not believe that this structure exists lawfully. As Ms. Dimshow stated, the one section of the building they're relying upon isn't even there anymore, as she stated. But I also believe that this building was cited for blight. It was asked to be torn down. They asked for an extension to kind of limp along for a while. But this building, I think, has been declared to be torn down. I don't think this building exists legally at all within our city. And so the idea that they can now use this footprint to and use it as some kind of way to kind of figure out a way on the parking, I don't think there's any proof of that. And I would ask for more time to brief that because I think we'll find that the building does not exist lawfully and will have to be torn down if something isn't done to it. So it doesn't meet that criteria either. So the variance should be denied without a doubt. Also, how many of these parking spaces can be handicapped? You can't have 32 spaces short. That's like an entire city block taking up people who for this building. So it doesn't meet the criteria of the variance. It should not be granted. And thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Anybody else speaking in opposition? Applicant
On Zoom, so I'm just waiting if there's anyone else in person.
on Zoom in opposition or in favor? We haven't really all.
You should be able to unmute Elliot.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
And we can see you.
Elliot?
Okay, my name is Elliot Michael. I do own the Margus building, which is the neighbor to the north of the proposed project. And while I would love to see that piece of property be developed, I don't think that it's in the city's best interest to allow the development in the manner which was presented this evening. There are several concerns, and since this is directly related to the variance for parking, I would like to point out several different problems that we have. Number one, we do have apartments within our building, and we do have 2 commercial suites down below. And one of the problems that I have from my tenants is that there is not enough parking as it exists currently. So now we're taking a situation in which we're running into issues with tenants who live there not being able to come home and park, or, you know, when they leave to go run an errand in town, that their parking space is taken, and when they come back, they can't park where they live. And this has become a really big issue for me as a landlord, because I'm trying to meet the needs of my tenants, but we can only do that to a certain extent. And by putting in a project which is going to require additional parking spaces, which there's no attempt to meet, that's a huge concern on my part. The other couple of things I'd like to point out is that in unclaimed spaces, which is across the street from the proposed project, they have the 6 spaces. But if you actually draw out the property line, which extends from the current property, there's really only 5 of those spaces, not 6. They're actually recouping another space, which is not in adjacent or in line with their property line. And so that's a major concern that I have. And as the proposal is, you know, if the commissioners accept it as is, then they can put whatever they want in there. If they make a modified variance, then we're still dealing with the parking issue. And even if they just had residential, they're still only meeting 65% of the requirement for parking based on 20 spaces, which the applicant proposed this evening they would need for their residential. And that's assuming that studios would only require 1 and 1, not 1.5 spaces per studio. So they fall pretty far short of that requirement. And there is another concern that I have, because it's been a concern that was brought up by 2 of the tenants, and that is those that are on the south side of our building right now. That building would be 4 stories, and I know this is outside the variance of the parking, but I did want to mention that that goes up 4 stories and would completely occlude visual as well as sunlight and ventilation from our building. And that's a concern that I have, which I do want to just make sure that it's on the radar and anything else that's future in regards to this project. I would love to see a project go through, but I think what's happening is that the current applicant and their owners are looking to maximize on profit and not necessarily on what's going to be best for the city. And so I'd like the commissioners most certainly to be looking at that. While we do want to be able to renovate, which I've worked very hard personally in renovating several buildings in the downtown core, and it's cost me more money to do certain things than I would like, and there are ways that I could have maximized, but I also want to create the most inhabitable place that we can have in the downtown core and for residents. And I think by going up to 4 stories, requiring the amount of parking, I just think that it's not going to create a living situation, which is going to be favorable for the city. And while it may not be as profitable to downsize the project, that would be my recommendation. And therefore, I have to oppose it, although I do want to see development to occur. And I'd be more than willing to also work with the applicant in ways that we may be able to look at different viable options. But I think as presented, I would recommend that the commissioners do reject it because as per code 17.108.050, it is extremely detrimental to this adjacent property owner. So I thank you very much for your listening to my concerns.
Thank you, Elliot. Nice to see you again.
Anybody else online? Please raise your hand or send me a chat.
Okay, so applicant, you can come up and have a rebuttal or?
And let me know, we did receive some written testimony which you could also rebut.
Do you want me to? Read it?
They all have a copy of it.
Okay, so I don't need to read
But
that.
this would be the opportunity if you wanted to rebut anything that was said in the testimony in opposition.
Thank you.
I think I'll start with Carl Hoffman's the local building to the north. I do find it interesting that he cites the exact same code that that subsection 4K, he was not required to provide additional parking by remodeling his building. The only difference is his building is a historic building and ours is not. So it's a bit ironic that he's citing something that helped him and not us. So why is it that, and as we just heard testimony from the neighbor to the north, how convenient for them to have an existing building and not to be required to provide parking where we have an existing building. We know it's dilapidated, it is a lawful structure, and we can remodel it, and we can meet that exception if we need to. But we're saying we can provide a better building by doing new construction. Now, our parking variance was for 43, and that was for 2 restaurants maximum. We're also open to 1 restaurant and limiting the other 2 general retail, which would be 29 parking spaces. We feel like that would be a good compromise. It seems like overreach to limit what we can put into our building, but considering the neighbors and the parking limitations, we're open to that idea. Let me just, I took a lot of notes, let me go through here. The engineer said 55 to 60% was a recommendation, but that is not a decree. The 43 variance was at 75%, bringing it down to 29. I believe that was around 60%. 65%, so it's very close. If you granted a 30 parking variance, that gives the owner and myself time to figure out, okay, let's juggle whether we have 16 residential units or we bring that down to a lower figure. Maybe we don't do the 3 stories, maybe it's only 2 stories with the lofts. So that gives us opportunity to still present something maybe on a smaller scale. But going anything less than 30 would probably kill the project. And if it's in the best interest of the community, then we'll build a parking lot and it will not be pretty. We were trying to work with you guys. This is an existing building. There is merit to that. You need to recognize it, and the city or the community needs to recognize that as well. Because of the existing building has commercial on the ground floor, we are meeting the spirit of what that building has by providing commercial on the ground floor. It would be a detriment to that city walk to have urban edge from numerous buildings interrupted by a parking structure. I don't think that's anything that we want, especially if the community has festivals at that location on the river. What we're trying to add to the city, we're trying to beautify the city. We recognize what is happening with the infrastructure development. We want to add to that. If there's anything less than a 30 parking variance, then you are basically destroying any sort of flexibility that we have in trying to weigh commercial versus residential spaces.
Well, can I ask a clarifying question about that? Are you saying less than 30
So I believe I outlined it was 29 parking spaces if it was residential, or sorry, if it was restaurant and or retail.
Okay, so you're saying the request is a 29 space variance?
29, yes.
Okay, all right,
Rounding up to 30.
so nothing less than 30 squares.
So that gives us flexibility, and I believe that would be a good compromise.
Sure.
Rather than doing a phased approach where, yeah, we could maximize just phase one tax lot 300 and do 59, or 59 spaces would be exempt. And actually, it could be more than that, because I was saying they were 1-bedroom units. We could go to 2-bedroom units, and we would be over 60 parking spaces that would be exempt. That's not what the city wants. We know that's not what the city wants. It's not what the city needs. So we're trying to work with you guys and compromise so that we can build something for this new development, because as of now, I don't know if any lots have been purchased or any agreements have been made. But I do know this is at a pivotal moment, and the location of our project is at the bookend between the existing Old Town and the new. So I would ask that not a outright denial be issued, but a consideration of a compromise for 30 spaces or less.
Have any further questions of the applicant or staff?
Jenny covered my question.
All right, thank you. Questions? Hearing no further questions from the commission, no further responses from staff, the public record is closed. This matter is returned to the table for deliberations and full discussion decision.
So I can kind of, I didn't really cover the different criteria. If you want me to go through that, I can, or if you guys just want to talk about what you heard, how do you want to go through this part?
It's a little confusing, all the different numbers.
Yeah, can you clarify, this is simply a parking variance,
Right.
not really discussing the facade of the building.
Right, that's.
Yeah, so there is later in the agenda, so yeah, we should
That's a separate hearing.
And it's not a public hearing, so later in the agenda, after another public hearing, there is a discussion item for the architectural review. And that's confusing because it's still not establishing the land use, we would just be looking at the concept. Plan that they've proposed and whether or not it complies with the architectural guidelines. But yeah, that is a separate memo in your report and it has different criteria. So thanks for that, because there was kind of a merging and.
Yeah.
So,
But it's a kind of a part, who's first, whose card is ahead of the horse, of course.
It's the analogy I was gonna use too, the cart before the horse here.
Well, I'm not sure whose cart was, because I'm just thinking. These variances are based on the proposal that they haven't presented yet. And so do we just give a variance? I mean, they could walk away and this variance would go with the land, right?
so that's, actually, that's a really good segue. So there are some, if the commission is weighing towards approval in any way, there are recommended conditions of approval. And one is clarifying that this does not grant site development review or conditional use permit. This is purely for the parking variance, so they would still need that. One is that this variance only applies to the development of the entire subject property. So they could take this variance approval and just apply it to one of the lots to be developed. It's for both properties for a scheme that involves both properties. And then it also doesn't apply. Like if they were to do some type of renovation of that existing building, because that's not the proposal. The proposal is to demo the building and build new. So that's addressed.
So there's, at the minimum, to be able to address the variance, we have to know they're gonna demo the building and build new or something,
Yes, that's the proposal before you.
of something.
And the conditions, if we go that route, require that. And then there's also a condition just about the variance being subject to a limited time duration. So if they don't move with a subsequent land, yeah, it's not just permanently run through the land.
Make sure of that.
There's a validity period. So, you know, you have three main options tonight, so at least that part's simple. You could approve the variance as proposed. You could grant less than the variance is proposed, and there's been some conversation about what that might look like. Or you could just deny it outright and say, this is too far. And you have to come up with findings about why you're denying it. So starting on page 6, there's a discussion of the different criteria. Starting with A. And this is, I think, probably the crux if you wanted to grant less or if you wanted to deny the variance. This is kind of where we would focus our findings. And I think it's sort of that last part. This variance would not be significantly detrimental in its consequence to other properties in the same zoning district or vicinity. So we've kind of heard testimony about that. We've got comments from our engineering manager about that. You know, parking is a finite resource. When you allow a variance in one area, it tends to bleed into other parts of the right of way. So it's inevitable. There's detrimental consequences.
So, it wasn't presented or in the record, the new extension of the development to the south of us here. So can't really consider that in our decision, is that correct?
Do you mean the roadway extension?
Parking, future parking.
Yeah,
That's the part we leave with the cart before the horse. If we knew
Yeah.
there was gonna be a parking garage or something, then
Yeah,
is there any merit to us weighing the temperature of the commissioners before we even go through all the criteria? If we're all in no right now,
That's
then it's
totally
conversation. If we're all in yes right now, then it's one conversation.
Yep.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
There has been some discussion of, the purposes of the code and the purposes of the exemption. Guessing we don't actually have any portion of the municipal code that actually says what the purposes are, correct?
Like purpose statements?
Yeah.
Yeah, in our zoning district, there are purpose statements. Yeah.
So we know the answer to the purposes of the code criteria of A.
Are you speaking in relation to that subsection K?
Yeah.
It probably doesn't get that granular, like the purpose statements are more about like the purpose of this different zoning.
Yeah, okay.
Generally,
Okay.
yeah.
It just seems that there's been. At the point where the question is, can you enjoy an exemption by removing an existing building and constructing something where the existing building was? If part of the purpose of the code is to preserve existing buildings and dissuade them from being removed, that would seem relevant.
I see.
To not penalize the person doing preservation.
Right.
Yeah, this is something that
Incentive for repurposing.
we have never pushed the limits of that particular criteria, and Jacob spent a lot of time in his office rereading that one subsection multiple times, and you know, even looking at the definition of building, which is what's included in your staff report, because it gets that sort of like in the weeds about like what is a lawful building. And if you remove walls, is it a building? If you remove the roof, is it a building? And ultimately, like, that's not their proposal tonight either.
Right.
So it's sort of outside of the scope of the decision before you is, you know, they're not proposing utilizing subsection K. They're just utilizing it in their argument to correct variance.
so I guess what I was getting at with some future parking somewhere else is we're really just discussing what's available now.
That's right.
So all the parking we see now, may never be parking anywhere else, as far as our city is, at this point, today.
You can also make the same argument about transportation. If you have,
Transit.
coming down here, and I mean, so that would eliminate some of the parking.
There could be a trolley. Someday there could be a trolley.
Yeah, so, I mean,
That's the same deal,
But I think that makes sense for the purposes of this conversation. The question is,
Here and now.
how does it fit with the facts on the ground now?
Yeah, with the parking that's available, what's it gonna do?
The flip side though, for me, because I came in feeling one way and I'm feeling a different way based on the proposal, just given how many opportunities have been missed. You know, he who hesitates. The rate that building is expanding, the cost of building is expanding, and opportunities are not ending, they're diminishing with those costs. I just see that, you know, somebody in good faith is, you know, we need to be partnering with new business, partnering with landowners, not giving away the store, but partnering. But it might be a question of things in the wrong order, not a bad project at all. But there's not enough facts on the table yet to determine where that number is. You know, does that make sense? I like the project, and there's been, even with no businesses down there, there's been people complaining about parking. For the 25 years I've lived here, people have complained about parking when there was nothing down there. So that's just what people do. If they can't park right in front, they're gonna complain. So whatever, I'll walk 3 blocks. I'm not so worried about that. I just wanna make sure that we're not 2 construction projects plus the infrastructure projects. How long do we block streets? One construction project on those 2 lots is gonna block the street once instead of twice. By doing 2 phases or waiting until another time. If it's already torn up, they can build it, and then by the time the street's done, they'll be done and it will look beautiful. It's one time, it's like ripping open the store one time. So I'm in the middle. I'm not a no, I'm not a yes, I'm a mitigating.
How about everybody else? Are there, you were asking to kind of,
Yeah. I would consider the lofts this at 1.5 parking spaces. I think it's a stretch to consider it at 1 parking space, so I think the number for the variance is the bigger number.
That the needed parking is underestimated.
Well, it's the 56 or the, so it isn't a small variance, this is a giant variance.
It is.
For me, it kind of doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, I don't know if it matters,
But
but
they're parking for anything of it.
So,
it would make a difference for how staff kind of interprets a future land use proposal if a variance were granted.
why don't you go in square foot?
I think the language should be
Then-
clarified.
Then you got 40 bedrooms.
Clarification.
Yeah,
Oh, and
sorry, you're both talking.
Right.
so that's why I mention it, is because the question was there, so,
That might be easier with the square footage rather than bedrooms.
Yeah.
1,000 square foot is pretty big for a loft. I mean, for St. Helens, it's big for a loft.
what's the use? What's the intended use of it? It's a bedroom.
Yeah, I think this feels like a separate conversation, because I think part of that is a discussion about. Would you anticipate, how many people do you anticipate sharing an open space bedroom?
It's still relevant because we're talking
Relevant
about
as a parking.
parking.
Right, but I think, at least for me, the difference between, if we count them as lofts or 1 bedrooms, that's what. 52 or 56 spaces total. Those 4 spaces are probably not gonna make or break my decision.
But
Yeah, 1% difference when in.
I see, for me, when I hear loft and I think about the loft, I think of it as comparable to a studio.
Well, and that's why that's the common thing, there's no wall, so the applicant has.
Very private.
Way, but then when we saw the square footage, we're like,
Bed and a bathroom on the loft, in the loft, right? On the drawing, you saw a bed and a bathroom.
what about the bathroom?
That's what the bed would do.
So it's a bedroom bathroom. to me.
But it's not,
Yeah, but the same thing can be said of a studio.
Yeah.
It's
Why they haven't separated out that
That
way,
needs clarification, so,
you
yeah,
know, on that.
I think,
not a private space, it's open.
General comments, I guess, yeah, I feel like I'm in the same thing with you, Jenny. I think it's a really good looking project. Something needs to be done. I kind of go with the idea of, you know, the existing building, you know, despite its condition or whatever, was still an existing building. You know, thinking of it that way. But that still doesn't,
opened it up.
yeah, and we've made our own, the city and the present landowner has made their own mistakes along the way with this whole thing, in terms of doing it. I don't mind that, but even if I take what the positives I'm saying, of saying the lofts or studios and give it the 4K exemption, we're still got a large variance request. Which concerns me because I'm very familiar with the parking problems down here, before construction or anything else. Coming along, and it's just, this would affect the other, not just the limitation for the new building that's being planned, but it is gonna affect the other buildings and businesses,
For who knows how long.
right there.
It seems analogous to our sewage problem. It's hard to
They can't-
build a subdivision, you don't have enough sewage to handle the sewage of that subdivision.
And our power problem too.
Can we build this because, can we accept it with some type of what would we call a payment towards the percentage
Payment in
of,
lieu of.
that percentage of a parking lot, whatever?
Fair share fee.
Yeah, fair share fee, but the difference is the city's actually actively working towards that goal. And we don't have a set plan to fix the parking problem that we already have, right? And in the future have with a new building.
Are we
I
working
mean, I
on a
guess-
transportation plan?
Yes, so the city's plans are, we have a grant to update our transportation systems plan. And within that, there's this need for a parking study downtown.
Okay,
So it's identified as a need. That's the first thing, is you look at how many parking spaces you're providing. What are the limitations? Are they 2 hour? Are they free? Is it a city lot? You just count everything you have. And then professionals come and look at the vacancy rates of each of those parking spaces and say, okay, you have this many vacant, this much of the time, do you have a shortage? They do a whole assessment, what you've got at every different time of the day. And then they make recommendations. So that's kind of the first step, is like assessing our existing conditions. But that takes money, and we haven't started that process yet.
does that include the future roads and developments that don't exist?
It's and it's also a tricky time, because you don't want to do a parking demand study right before a bunch of stuff. So it's like, picking the right time to do it. So yeah, it's a really, we're in flux right now.
And timing wise, chances are the transportation systems plan itself is unlikely to do the parking study. But what it's likely to do is identify that as a future need. So then that's a need adopted in the plan, which is the leverage to get grant monies for the study. And so, it's a few days away.
Me, it's like that. When I saw the project, I think you nailed it. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
But people can come back when we have parking handled. It's like, it's just too early to put this kind of demand on already struggling parking. The variance is just too big.
My thought is, I recognize this is not before the commission right now, but the proposal to alternatively use the existing structure as a base to build on, it's a clever use of the statute. I think you might have us there. But I think just because that is a possible option doesn't mean that the statute intends or allows for a tear down and rebuild. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the code that says you can use existing footprints. We would just say you can tear down and rebuild. So I don't think the proposal as made fits. Whether there's a way to get to a, what phrase I think is a minimum amount that will alleviate the hardship. Sounds like you've identified the minimum is 30 spaces and we've only got 13 spaces available, so that's still pretty significant variance. But I suppose I'd be willing to talk about it.
Where do they go?
Where do the people go?
Where do the 20 drivers go?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the question is, can you get under 30? And if that's not feasible, it's not feasible.
Yeah.
Well, back to Commissioner Shoemaker's point about is if the commission's leaning towards denial, you know, that changes how we wanna craft our findings. If the commission is leaning towards some compromise where there's some percentage allowed, then that changes our findings a little bit too. So I think I'm hearing mixed messages about that, you know. So we have getting more-
Let's have the mixed feelings about it.
yeah, so getting more granular, you know, yes, you heard testimony about what the minimum would be needed, but you can still grant what you feel comfortable granting. That doesn't mean you can't, you know, entertain a variance request that's, you know, less than they're requesting.
We were drafting a motion for denial.
If you were, then I think you would want to talk about,
Well, it's like you said, that first criterion is really the one where it's gonna be,
and then the last one. So A and E, I think, are the main, you know, minimum necessary to alleviate the hardship, and then detrimental to other properties. You know, I've been taking notes as you're talking. I mean, if you were crafting denial, I would mention it's just too large of a request, that it would be too detrimental to properties. You could talk about, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of simple.
It's just not only to property owners, but the city, we have a lot of events very close to this, that bring in a lot of cars that don't live there. And
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the sentiment that walking's not the worst thing,
oh, I agree too,
but I do understand people that enjoy it.
I mean, I've lived in cities where never had a car.
Yeah.
And, you know, I liked it a lot. Yeah. But I have to worry about things like your car and paying for it and that type of stuff. So if you're talking about livability, I mean, if we had
We have public transit.
public transportation, if we had, places to, you know, go to the market, that type of stuff, I mean, it'd be great. I mean, I hate parking. I mean, it's the worst thing. I think it's a urban blight.
yeah.
We have parking in front of the Fort County Courthouse. I mean, these are $100,000 lots. People are parking their cars in. It's just, I think. And then when we're talking about capturing, claiming some parking, public parking, and that seems very odd to me. I mean, it went out and claiming, well, my flag over there too, so. I don't know, it's just, I'm back and forth on it, cause like I said, I don't like parking whatsoever, I mean. It's. But we also have these, you know, Elliot, who had testified, I mean, he went through the whole code. And, you know, did everything by the book. And so, I mean, I go back and forth on it, so variance. Well,
It's such a hard
glad
one.
I could muddy the waters for you.
I have one question, and this might be totally not related. A while ago, we used to have certain parking requirements for residential development, and there was some pushback at the state level that we couldn't require as many.
Oh, for duplexes.
Yeah, that the state was pushing back to a less car dependent footprint and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. There was nothing in commercial or anything about.
So yes, that applied to duplexes in particular,
Okay.
not multifamily. So
Okay.
our parking codes never changed
For
for.
multifamily or like big box stores or nothing, it did not
Nope,
change
it
for
didn't
anything.
address commercial development at all.
Okay, I knew that there was conversations in the past.
And it was more, it wasn't so much about, you know, thinking of a less traffic-free society. It was really about the discrimination.
Not being
of
prejudicial.
duplexes. And so putting them on equal footing.
I was making sure as we see the allocation for ADA sites, all user sites and electric sites and all this stuff that the parking complex becomes more convoluted. But it doesn't seem to matter how many businesses you have, people who complain about parking in this town.
Hmm.
They just do, they
yeah,
always
yeah,
have.
I think that's true.
They have a big lot over there behind 2 Cs.
Yep.
It's always empty and people still complain, so.
It's full now, all the time. No, it's quite, I mean, quite a bit, but I mean.
They're working on everything
Yeah,
too.
that's
A lot of construction workers about, and things are blocked. Sounds like we're in the same place though. The compromise number is not low enough, I think.
I think that's true. I mean, if I was arbitrarily pulling a number out of thin air, I might say, well, you look at the residential spaces, because sure, people want to park near their place of living so they can move stuff in closely. Maybe you include spaces for employees, but you know. I think a lot of restaurant traffic, you
Well, the
work
work
and you walk, it's fine.
that we've never done here, that they do in other places, is they do pause zones. Like, they have pause zones, so somebody can unload their groceries, they can unload something, they can unload somebody in a wheelchair and then go find their parking space.
Clever.
So lots of places that have more than 2 stories.
Yeah.
Have areas that are marked out. Their driver must remain at the wheel, 10 minutes or less, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
To where somebody could pull in and drop somebody off. That was limited in their ability or was carrying something heavy. We
The
never
turnaround. The turnaround.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I'm just thinking about is to instead of looking at everybody pulling up and being right in front of their restaurant or right in front of their house. This is high density and that's not what high density looks like.
Right.
You know, anybody that's been
yeah.
to Houston and a bigger town knows you don't park right in front of the restaurant or in front of where you're going to visit. I'll park in front of my hotel room. You know, it's like your car goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking that that's more what our development is like, because the Muckle building, look at how tall they are, how far away those people are parking. But it does have to be reasonable for people that are in groceries or dropping grandma off for dinner.
I think we are in pretty much the same spot.
Yeah, I think we're in the same spot. It's just beyond that useful space, that number.
Want me to make a motion? What that motion would sound like.
I say we move to deny the variance.
Based on A and E.
Yeah, I think if the sought variance
Yeah,
is,
based on findings in A and E. To decline the variance at this time.
So moved.
And second vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
And I'd like to say no.
I know.
And, something, other, but, and it's, my hands are tied with what we have here in front of us.
I think it's a lovely development. I think
I like it too.
the ordinance is pretty clear and I don't know how to get down to 30 spaces to get that variance in.
Even lower than that.
Yeah, I mean, in most of the places that we're talking 10%, not half of them. Yeah. You know, most of the variances, it's been like they need 12 and we give them 9. It's not the huge of a percentage of the other places.
So the final written decision of the planning commission may be appealed to the city council. The notice of decision will be mailed to all persons who testified or submitted comments in the appeal. Deadline will be included in the note. Sorry, we couldn't give you what you
Thank you
wanted.
for all your time and attention, though. It was such a good proposal.
I like it.
A lot of thought put into it.
Anything quick, I'll read it, but
Tell them to
It's heartbreaking.
encourage them to come back.
That's great.
The tender could have been 2 months.
Working words with all of this all down here.
I was thinking about that. That's exactly what I thought about. I was like, yo, that's
Current parking, my street is.
Yeah,
You live on the funny street.
yeah. Oh, sure.
I remember when I first moved here, walking that street, I was like, what is up with this? The first year I was here, we watched fireworks from probably right out in front of your house. It was like, yeah, I'm not doing that again.
I'm saying.
Back home before it was even over.
I guess that means we kind of have to talk about the building materials.
Love this beautiful building.
We did, although I would not like
Or drive out of town or whatever.
I think it should be better than that.
Yeah,
I was actually should be part of a long conversation.
Let's continue on.
And melody down here and how to accomplish that. We don't have to have big variations.
Right, if it was already spelled out, it would be easier for people.
Continue on.
Yeah.
I mean, next, public hearing. The time is now 7:40 PM. The public hearing is now open. This is a quasi judicial land use hearing. The subject of this hearing is a request for historic resource review. Subject property is identified in the county assessor's map as lot 2800 on map 4N 1W3BA. The applicant is Steve and Melissa Kenoyer. The owner is Wanda Hawkins. Because quasi judicial proceedings require the observance of certain procedural formalities, it will take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the commission wish to declare a potential or actual conflict of interest or bias in this matter?
Not a conflict of interest, I don't think, but I got noticed because I'm a property owner that's across the street.
Within the buffer.
Right. I don't feel like I have any bias or conflict.
Well, let's ask this next question. Does any member of the commission wish to declare an ex parte communications or site visits?
I'm a real estate, I'm a real estate broker, so I've shown the property, been in it many times. I also have on the board of directors of the Historical Society, so there's been a lot of discussion about it lately regarding the history of the project, but it doesn't create any kind of bias.
Similarly, I've looked at the site because I'm a sucker for looking at historical buildings, but I don't think I have any bias about that.
Anyone from the audience object to the ability of the commissioner to make a fair decision? None? Generally, the order of proceedings will be as follows. Required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, neutral testimony, those opposed, rebuttal by applicant, final questions, close of the record, deliberations, then decision. The following statements are required to be made at the commencement of the hearing pursuant to City Code and ORS 197.7975. Following is a list of the applicable substantive criteria for this decision. City of St. Helens Municipal Code 17.36.040 criteria for alteration. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria as described. Further criteria in the comprehensive plan or land use regulation which the person believes applies to the decision. Failure to raise an issue, including constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval in this hearing, in person or in writing, or failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority an opportunity to respond to the issue, precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue and precludes an action for damages in the circuit court. Yeah,
Mr. Chairman,
here,
so this is one of our designated landmarks. They are proposing alterations, which basically means a significant change to the outside. And that is something within your purview as the Historic Landmarks Commission. That's why we're here. So there's several things proposed, and I'm gonna talk about those in the context of several pictures. Luckily, we have several combined with what the museum has and what the city had. And all the ones here in this photo presentation are included in the staff report. I just figured it'd be easier for presentation purposes to look at each one individually, talk about the various elements that are proposed. I'll note though, it was built in 1914 and in the 83-84 application to include the downtown historic district into the National Register. At that time, it noted minimal or minor alterations. Now we did, well, the historic Conservation Office did a resurvey of the district in 2014. We didn't get the report until 2017. And then for some properties in that report, it noted some categories may have changed. And the categories were generally, contributing or not contributing to the historic district. And this one was not identified for change. So that was good. But it did note that, as has been commented across the state over the last 30 years, the city has seen a large amount of historic materials replaced with modern materials, particularly vinyl. And this is one of our vinyl clad buildings, which is one of the issues we're going to talk about. So there's 6 things in this package of proposals. One is replacing the roof because it's leaking. 2 is replacing the front door because it has a crack, as it's not functional as at least like the door should be. Safety rails for the porch, a safety rail around the parking area, removing the vinyl and repairing the original siding, and then foundation repair. So this photo is the earliest one we have. Note the lack of buildings adjacent to it. And it's a good one to kind of, I think it's a pretty good representation of what it was originally. And so note, there's kind of 3 tiers of siding. You have the bottom one, which is white there, where it's more horizontal siding. And then the next, the second story is more of kind of a textured siding. And then the gable dormer at the top, at least in this photo, you see kind of a board and batten height. Interestingly, look at the shingles. They do not look like tile shingles. That's important because one of our later pictures that shows tile, there is some historic use of tile here. But this one not showing it, I think, is very significant. So we're talking about the roof. We are going to be talking about the front door, which is the same door throughout these series of pictures. So there's where we start. The next one is another early photo. This one's kind of cool just because of the storm damage, not probably cool at the time. But it gives us, it's one of the few really good shots we have of the north face. And so then the next one, this is another early one. This is a good shot of the river facing side. And some of what we see on this side is some of the supports, which have kind of an arc theme or shape to them. All right, so now we're a little closer in time. This is 1983-84. Now remember that the historic district noted not a lot of changes, and you see that similar siding. One thing I want to point out here, in the listing, it talked about ornamental sideboards on the front porch, which are here, not very visible. But those ornamental sideboards are also part of the deck, and you can see glimpses of those in some of these photos. And then this is a good angle shot, so the railings for the porch would be in this area here. So same era, seeing it from the back. Now, one thing I noted here is if you look really closely, you can see some of that. It's hard to see here, but you can see some of those ornamental cut boards. But note, I see some siding problems here. Interestingly, River Street's gravel at this time, and it has nothing to do with the application, but we'll go back in time. So now, a front view, this looks like tile.
So at one point there was tile on there, but I don't think it was original. Another interesting thing to note, so we see the same. We see the same siding on the first and second level, but note the change on that gabled dormer. You don't have that board and batting siding, which is still visible on the third tier on other facades, but in this one, it kind of has a brick-like pattern.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting change
Yeah.
that we observed, look, comparing the old photos. The next one. So this is 1990s, maybe late 80s. I'm just judging by the vehicles. Those vehicles look early 90s to me. Definitely past 83. And we don't see a whole lot of change to the siding, but it is kind of looking rough. Especially on that lower level. And then as far as the safety rail around the parking area, this one you can see, there's that white car and that Chevy, I don't know, maroon Chevy pickup to the right. You can see that grade difference, which is one of the concerns, safety concerns that potential prospective buyers, hopefully the applicant had. So the next photo. All right, so 2009. The reason we have this, back in 2009, I asked Lisa Scholl, who was our planning secretary at the time, and I can't remember why, but I remember doing it to take a shot of our designated landmarks. And so that's why we happen to have this time period. So now, okay, now it's clad in that vinyl siding. And if we go back, the vinyl siding in that gable dormer is kind of a fish scale type, whereas the rest is kind of typical horizontal in its makeup. So now these are ones taken more recently, not too much different than the one that we just saw. Yeah, that was that kind of thing happens. So another angle there. And the next one. This is a good angle showing that the vehicle drop off. Head to the next one. A little closer view. I'm really curious to see, you know, it's after researching this, it's kind of like Christmas. I almost want to see the siding off just to see what's under there and the condition of it. But this is a good view of that front porch and how there's vinyl over those ornamental cut boards, which hopefully aren't, I don't know how those are to replace. A little better view of the south facing side, where the south face is the one that gets pummeled a lot by the weather. And in this case, it's pretty exposed, being elevated. And so we wonder what's under that vinyl. Another side shot showing that elevation change and that front porch. And then some shots of the back showing the foundation, the exposed supports and the arches that are in there. And there wasn't any obvious cracking in the concrete, just from conversations, not my own observations, that the foundation stuff is internal. I don't know that for sure. That's just my assumption based on conversations. And is that no, one more. So just a little bit more of the foundation. This is a good shot. So on the photo to the right, you can see a little stairway and the lattice work. That's a separate structure. That's not a historic resource and not connected to the home. So it is irrelevant to your position here. It shows up better in this one. So, looking at what we have, I'll just go through, well, another thing to consider in these conditions, a lot of times we have a second chance to review things and to review things in greater detail. Someone asks proposal, we know there's gonna be a subsequent development permit, like a building permit, maybe public improvements, and so that gives us a time to, or a chance to look at those details and make sure everything is cool. But in this case, a lot of these, a lot of aspects of this proposal may not require a building permit. And so if there's question, well, how do we handle that? And I didn't talk about it in the conditions of this report, but in thinking about it, well, at the time, and since the report was done, it seems like some of these should have a final plan. And I'll talk about those as we go through each of these. And, one of the questions is, should that final development plan go before you as a historic landmarks commission? Or do you just trust us as staff to handle it? And maybe that'll vary depending on the future. So the first condition is just any building permit submitted has to comply with the standards for alterations and the conditions. So that's a given one. For the roofs, we know we want to have good sound roofs for buildings because leaky roofs are not good for integrity of buildings. Looking at the history of it, just replacing with a gray, I think it's gray. You can correct me if I'm wrong on anything since the applicant is here. That seems okay. It may have been wood at one point, in that early photo, it was tile at one point. But it's been this traditional type of roofing, and so I don't see a problem with that. That seems like something that we can approve easily.
Do we have say on the color of the building though, that needs to stay within the color palette of the historical photos? I'm only asking that because it would affect the roof color, I would think.
I think if we feel that the color is important as it relates to the historic resource, then yes. And I thought about that, before, because I didn't have that really old photo initially. And I'm like, holy cow, maybe it originally had tiles, which naturally have a reddish color. And then, it has kind of a reddish color now, and so that would be in sync with that. But you go to that old one, and I don't know what color it was. It looks like it'd be a wood type of
Clearly a defining feature,
Yeah.
the top is dark
Yeah.
and the bottom is light.
I think you could certainly say that the roof color is historically darker than the body color. Get it whether you could determine what color it is, but it's definitely darker.
Yeah, so I think that would kind of go into that. So if you feel it should be a different color, that's certainly a discussion we can have. So that's the roof. The door,
We can't tell people what color they can make the roof, can we? I mean, how close can you tell people?
well, when we look at historic resources, it's a little different, and we don't get these that often.
Okay,
Some years we have 0, sometimes we have 1 or 2. It just so happens this year we have 3. So it's not something we see a lot, and I can understand why. It's kind of weird that we get into that kind of thing, especially with the residents. So the door, and the applicant provided the slides, or the examples, which we can look at too. I didn't include in the photo slides because I just wanted to get through those, but we can bring them up there too. But the door, and maybe we should go to the staff report since those are put on there. So the original door looks like it's the same through all the photos, and it had a pretty basic wood slab with a lot of relief there. And then you have the little 4-windowed or 4-lighted window. And the one that they're proposing is a little more, it's solid wood still. But it's a little more ornamental in its makeup. And it has, I think, it still has,
Still traditional mission.
it still has your windows or the lights, but it's 6 instead of 4. So you would be able to tell it's not original, and arguably it's still in line with the historic structure. It really depends on how much you want to emulate that original door, really. Is this close enough or should it be closer to that? And if you're thinking it should be different from this, would we want to find a home before it's installed or not? Because the door would require a building permit. I should note the roof wouldn't require a building permit. And that's what was tile and had a lot of weight to it, which they're not proposing. So that's the door. The safety rail on the front porch. So some of my thoughts on this, and it's the mystery of, what's the condition of the siding behind the siding on those box posts? And is attaching those safety rails to that something you think is going to be detrimental? One of the things you could consider is that they're not attached to the home, they're attached to the stairs or the ground and self-supported. And then just, they're separate from the building, but still providing a safety purpose. I don't know if the impacts to the box posts would be great, but there would be some there. And so I think that's something to consider. I think if the condition was that they not be attached to the building, that would probably be good enough. Of course, you can disagree with me. If you're okay that they were attached, maybe you would want to consider a final plan.
Another railing you just showed was for the side.
Yeah, that's for the rear back side, whatever.
Yeah, the basic metal one is more of a drop off. The larger timber wood is for the stairs, the front entry.
Can you find a photo to give me an idea of where that drop off on the back is? I'm just having a hard time picturing where that railing's
I
going.
was thinking it was over here.
It's,
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Steps that go into the kitchen.
oh, okay.
Are there steps going into the kitchen then?
You're at the right where that blue barrel is. There's stairs that are going down the hill and there's nothing to hold yourself as you go down the hill. It's very dangerous.
That seems pretty sketchy, yeah.
Well, we'll give you a chance to,
I asked her, so.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I did not gather that from the application. So that would be new. I thought the safety rail was for that drop off there between the parking area and the yard. That was my understanding from the application. And so for that one, just don't attach it to the house. I think that's a pretty simple one. I guess we'll hear testimony about the other one and that's what we're in. So then the siding proposal. So this is one that I feel like we're partially blind in making a decision. So we're removing the vinyl. I think most of us can agree from an historic preservation standpoint, that's really. But what's underneath and how good or bad is it? And what does that mean? And so there's a condition in there that reflects one of the standards about repairing rather than replace, and one of the variation requires replacement, that the new shall match the old design color, etc. And so there's a lot that we don't know, and that's where, maybe you want that final plan And maybe you want that to go to you so they can talk about the extent of disrepair and how that condition is gonna be met, because there's so much that we don't know on lighting now. And so it could be that you're okay with the vinyl being removed, but before work underlying that occurs, that a final plan comes before the Historic Landmarks Commission. And that may not require a building permit. It really depends on the extent of damage and repair. Finally, the foundation work. The foundation work will require a building permit. So there is a chance to relook at that. I think it's internal. Maybe we'll have some testimony on that. And I don't know if you would be as concerned about having a final plan before you, since there is that building permit aspect. So that's that in a nutshell. Let's open up for questions and testimony if you feel at that time.
Any other questions for staff? We can have time for the applicant to come forward if you'd like, and make the comments on the record. State your name, but
Melissa Coyer.
okay.
I'm a potential buyer for this property. I think it's beautiful. It's a stunning home and I want to keep the integrity of the home. There's some concerning aspects of this home. As a potential buyer, one of the primary is obviously the foundation. As we have been under contract, we've got bids. And the most important thing out of all of this proposal for me is actually the foundation, because materials have changed in the 100 years since it's been built. The bid that came in was foundations first, and they would need to put in steel adjustable posts. So underneath this house, there are wood posts holding the foundation, and they're floating. They're not even on the rocks that they're supposed to be on right now. And that second pillar, the house is basically floating on that as well. It's not holding any weight. So I did get the bid from the foundation company. So underneath that house in the dark would be adjustable steel posts instead of wood. And then around those main cement posts, there would be still adjustable posts as well. So it takes a structural engineer, so I don't know what the look will be, but I'm hoping that with your blessing that we could just rely on the structural engineers, what they recommend to keep this house safe and livable. But in order to do that, obviously we'll get a permit, but the expense to even go to have the structural engineer to start it, I just would like to have the preliminary meeting discuss it. The proposed bid is $104,000 to fix the foundation. And part of the water damage that happened, why this is eroding the house, is on the right side of the house. Water is going down the hill and going into that last level there and then flowing down. And so one of their proposed items in the bid was to put a French drain on the side. Yes, right there. That's where all the water is coming through. So that is one of the main aspects. And since it would affect the look of the house potentially with steel and other modern elements, I don't have a bid before you of what that would look like because it would take a structural engineer. But as far as the roof, going to number one, I chose gray because I thought of what materials would look like back in the day, and I thought maybe slate is more on like the neutral colors, and I thought gray could go with any color palette in the future. I also, going to the siding, I don't know what's underneath the siding, but I do like the different textures. I like that it's shingled. I like the board and I like all the different levels of texture, and I would want to emulate that with modern, whatever I could replace to make it still look like that. And with the door, the same issue with that. Right now, it has a crack all the way through, and if you were just to kick it, it would break in two. And so these were all issues as a potential buyer I wanted to bring to you right away, because when we close on this house, these are safety issues that I had to address immediately. Obviously, the safety for my family, I would want, structurally sound door. And then that size of the door is not a common size. And so it would be a custom door. And so knowing that I have your blessing, I could start sourcing the materials in that look. And that door that I proposed was the closest thing that I could come to with this original. I'm trying to think what else is on here. The safety railing, that's just more for current day code because it's a couple stairs up. And the porch is in need of repair as well, but it would be replaced with same. And then again, we briefly talked about this side where you need a handrail, and sounds like you offered a solution just not to attach it to the house. So yeah, those are the things.
Would you be open to the handrails being not for the house, but a similar look? Look.
You're talking about the front porch rails.
For the front porch.
The proposal is this wood.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, while I get to it.
Right here.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what non-attachment is like, but.
Oh,
That was for the other railing, I thought.
Well, so you scroll up to the current day photo that has the red Sharpie on it.
it's like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so there, I mean, I think there would be an option to potentially put anchors for safety railings right in front of, right about there, right where your cursor is, right in front of the house, so it's not connected. Which probably avoids the entire conversation. Or we can have a conversation about attaching it.
Either way, I'm fine with not attaching it to the house.
it's for I understand the safety. A lot of homes you can't even get a loan on them if they don't have a railing on steps that high.
Does current code require that there's a handrail?
Yeah,
It's more than 3 steps, I believe so.
right. I mean, it's more than 10 inches of a drop.
Attached to the house and be historically.
I mean,
I'm not even, I wouldn't be stuck on that because it's something that
It's appropriate for the period.
somebody could easily remove and you would never know. It's not ruining anything by adding handrails.
Right.
Modern.
I'm not worried about the handrails either.
I think the handrail proposal is
Inside,
have a historically fitting look, so it's.
inside the pump. Forwards, right?
Do you mind
Okay, I
saying,
gotcha.
sorry, do you mind saying what your intention of the color of the house is, since we're talking about the color of the roof?
I have a color palette from Sherwin-Williams. They have a historical color palette, and so I'm looking at more of the salmon and tan colors because the house adjacent is green, and then the house, obviously you see over there is white, and then the other historical home is blue. So I would want to stay away from their color palettes. And the look that I've been thinking is obviously it would be multicolor because Craftsman were multiple colors. So a primary color, I was thinking in the taupe and tan, and then that the third level would be in a bolder Craftsman color that is either maybe like a rose salmon, like a brown red. That is darker, I don't know what it originally was, it's hard to tell. And then that third level would be probably in that same color as well.
I think you have a lot of different historically fitting color palettes to choose from. I think you've identified the critical piece, which is just having, as you said, the Craftsman different delineated colors, yeah. What those colors are, you've got a variety of options.
This house is a mystery, this style to me, because I'm not concerned.
So you can go with the twin tone?
That's fair. There's some,
What is it?
some embellishments.
And then the third tone would be alabaster, the trim would be a white.
Yeah. I'm just talking about the first and second floor there,
Yeah, so the,
Right in the middle.
like it was original.
yeah, I would want to go to the original.
Any questions of the applicant?
And while the applicant's there, I do want to note, one of the suggested conditions about the siding, was that if the underlying siding on that dormer facing first, if it needs to be replaced, it should go back to that, board and batten style rather than the brick. Look at it.
Yes.
I would agree. I think in the bid for the foundation, they said that they have to remove some of the siding, and that's why I included this. And so it is a mystery, and that is a mystery expense as well of what that will be. But the one thing that I do know is that when we start opening it up, that I need to be able to move quickly to secure it or to make sure that there's no more damage. And my fear is waiting for additional meetings. That's why I addressed all of these one time.
Would she be able to have the modern stuff to make her house safe if it was obscured from view? I mean, because how we secure things now today is not what she has now. But if it's obscured from view, like if it's clad on the outside, if it's inside of a wood box, so.
You talking about
by.
foundation work?
Yeah, so you wouldn't drive by and
The
see.
engineer might. You might have to go on the outside according to this, but
I did. Yeah. I feel like you gotta do what you gotta do to save the foundation, otherwise you have no house at all.
Can you just clarify for me in this photograph where it talks about the foundation and these wood pieces, are this what you're proposing will probably be metal on the outside of the foundation?
Can I approach and
Please.
copy for you to see? So this is where you see in that shadow, there's wood, and you can pass this around, there's wood, and they're proposing these being still adjustable posts. Right now, the wood is just like a log, and it's resting sideways on a rock. I wish I would have.
Everything shifted.
Yeah, everything shifted, and then the second pillar
Behind the concrete.
behind the concrete.
That's good.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
And ask if you've gotten more than one bid over the structural engineering.
No, I just had one bid for the foundations. There's not a lot of companies that
Do that kind of work.
Kind of work.
Just wondering if, somebody might have a different.
Unique that we're concerning ourselves with the back since it's visible from river.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Everywhere.
At least I think if we're understanding that diagram correctly, it sounds like, it looks like most of the foundation work would not be visible in that, from the view presented in those photos, so.
Except for the second post,
It's not
Oh, that
here.
one, I
See
see.
this wood? I think it's these
Yeah.
wood pieces here, not.
Well, you would know those
The
more.
other one is a gutter, so.
let's see what they say on the post.
Some kind of facade of the.
Yeah, I feel like I
Saying that they,
Somewhere.
Keeping the arches though, right, on the.
yeah, I think as if we can, if the structural engineer says, yeah, I would like to keep them the same. They would have to remove some of the siding to get access. What else did they say?
Envious that I'm not sitting in your position, I'd love to do that.
Oh, yeah. I think it'd be really fun. It will be fun. I'm trying to find anything else that.
Buying and fun, yeah.
Yeah. It says, they will set wire mesh screen over filled stone and or concrete foundation. Shotcrete shot to encase filled stone. Shotcrete shot to build back eroded foundation. Area will be formed and have sponge finishes. So,
Restoring.
yeah.
That's good. Any other questions of, applicant? Yeah, do you have any questions there?
Yeah, I wanna, so one of the things we have to consider is that the application runs with the land. And it may not always be the original applicant. And so we have the circumstance where we have this application for a property that may or may not be purchased by you and your husband.
Right.
And so one of the things I think the commission has to consider. And, you know, your testimony, of course, but, you know, it could be a different party that takes this on. And I just mentioned that in like, you know. Who would require, you know, plan or just rely on the conditions, or not. And I'm not trying to sway you either way, but just these are the thoughts. These are the considerations that we have to juggle. in
Right,
decisions like this.
the current owner could make these repairs themselves, or if we end up falling out as a buyer.
To resolve that potential issue, though, we could require that the final plans come through us.
Yeah. And maybe. The exception to that. And then it gets murky are emergency repairs, for weatherization prior to final completion or something like that.
Did you have roof and foundation issue?
Is if they take the siding off, there's something that needs to be patched to alleviate additional deterioration. That makes sense. But before the final product. And that just might be a question of how we word that, if you're needing to put that approach.
Excuse me?
You're welcome.
Oh, thanks.
Do we have anyone testify in support of the application? With neutral testimony, not in favor or against? Need your name.
My name is Paul Pulliam. I live next door to this property with my wife, Pamela Powell. Our property is in Pamela Powell's name. We're actually excited about this for obvious reasons. Those of you that have seen this wonderful house probably are aware of what we have done to our house next to it. We have a little carriage house that has a wall that is exactly on the property line, which is from an earlier discussion this evening, a preserved building that at an enormous cost was preserved from the 1920s and brought into an application that matches the property. Well, our property is not historical because predecessor owners have done a lot of changes to it. We're pretty proud of the way it looks. And it's nice to hear somebody say they went to Sherwood and Williams and was using their color palette, because we've had the privilege of photocopying our color palette several times for people that have stopped. And there are several houses around this community that also have that color combination. One is a former city employee, now retired. We have some concerns while we're in favor of the property because we have a retaining wall that formerly had an underground tank that has been removed next to it. And while the historical designation does not go to either the deck or to that retaining wall, we would like to ask that on the basis of a garage that at one time encompassed both properties, it is shown in one of the old photographs, be used as a basis for the rest of that area to also have the same style of railings put on. The wall encroaches upon our property. Which is no big deal because we're on the property line and we've always had a working agreement in the 28 years we lived next to the Hawkinses. Whatever it took to be good neighbors along that property line was done. And our request is that that be taken care of, maybe under the guise of historical look-alike or whatever. The site, we were there when the final siding was put on.
There was minor damage to the siding, but Wayne Hawkins, who decided in there, put the vinyl on primarily because he was reaching the point where he could not do the paint and the maintenance. So I think we're both hopeful that as the new occupant tears that siding off of there, we'll have a glass of champagne, look at it, and I think they'll be excited with what they're going to find underneath that. We were also there when the roof was removed, the tile roof was removed. Sadly, because it was stressing some of them. So I heard the staff report that they're going to not be able to put tile back on that, I'm sure. We used Hardy Shake on ours to take it retroactive and Hardy Plank. As I recall, the siding that is underneath this, it is a wooden siding that is not overly decorative, but I'm sure that there are the cement style of new shakes that can be put on this property that not only increase the fire retardant for any repairs, but also lower the insurance costs on your property. We're quite pleased with some of the results we got that were unexpected. So any event, the other reason we're here is because if we don't come and testify, of course, any future use, if it does change hands, as Jacob has suggested at some point in time, we cannot appeal. So we want to get on record that we're concerned about the drop off between our property and this property, and that we want the historical significance to go along. And we're looking forward to welcoming new neighbors into our hood that can do it. We'll get to fight the city's parking problems that we have a tremendous problem with at times. And hope that we would encourage you to just situate the planning commission in a position where they can review this for the future as well as for the present.
Thank you.
If you have any questions.
Are you to the south? To the south? To the right?
We're south.
Okay, all right. That's what I
You
thought.
can see the corner of the house in this picture, and you have what we call the carriage house, which was the segregated.
I saw that. Yeah.
And it also is on the front property line and on the side property line. So it's one of the 3 or 4 houses along that stretch of South First Street that are right on the line. Somebody's apartments, the old beauty shop, if they just put some new T111 on the front. Our building is right on the line in front. In fact, the city sidewalk encroaches about 2 inches into the property in that area. So, any other questions?
One else have testimony in neutral? Anybody in testimony in opposition to the application? All right. Does the applicant have any rebuttal to anything? Okay, I guess that's. Any other questions of staff? Hearing no further questions to the commission, no further responses from staff, public record is closed. This matter is returned to the table for deliberations of oral decision.
I want to say the Shins built my building too across the pond there. She was an interesting woman.
Guys,
I don't have any issue with the attaching the front handrail to the front. I think it's weird if you don't attach it, and it's something that you could reverse.
like attached to the porch itself?
Like, yeah, come down from these,
Just like it's pictured, it's gonna be the most stable.
Yes, I think that's,
come down.
Okay.
I think that is probably the best outcome all around.
I don't love the color of the roof, but it's personal preference, so I don't think that means anything to me. The one thing that I would like to encourage is to restore the door. It has beautiful beveled glass, and I actually had a restoration specialist look at it, and it would be a restoration of the door, which might actually be cheaper than buying a new custom door. So, or somehow take that original glass and have something made that looks more like the original door on there. I think that's a big change. Otherwise, I think you gotta do what you gotta do on the metal posts to save this amazing house, and it takes a lot of heart and imagination to find somebody that will save it, so I'm thrilled. The door is really nice. I'd like to see them. You're supposed to try to repair instead of replace, and I think the door could be repaired. Or if you have to replace it, like for like.
Agree with that.
The only additional note I would have is I don't think assuming the number 6 item or number 5, the safety rails on the far right, assuming those are in fact not attached to the house, I don't think we really have any say about it. But it would be cool if it looked like a historical piece with everything else. I don't think we have the authority to tell you one way or another, but it would look great. Yeah, otherwise I think we've covered everything I had.
I would like to see us have final approval come before us. And maybe the solution for anything that needs to be done quickly is if the siding is replaced with exactly what's on there now. I mean, I think there's ways to weather it in temporarily while you get approval, with the exception of if she puts the beveled siding or whatever that it is under there. Same thing up, then we give it our blessing. If it changes at all, then it should come before us.
So we would say, there's approval for like replacements and everything else we need to re-review.
And then for protection of if she doesn't actually perform on the sale for whatever
Sure.
reason, that it needs to come back to us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's another thing. So final plan must come before the Landmarks Commission.
Okay, to keep things organized, you mind going through each item just to see where we stand? If you want to.
Each,
Uh,
words and recommendation?
so, first of all, the roof. Are you cool with that as it is?
Yes.
We'll put that as it is.
Yes.
Nobody's frowning. Giving me nasty looks, okay. The door,
I mean, can I just, it should say architectural roof shingles, so they don't.
okay, as long as architectural roof shingles.
Well, we don't want her to put 3-tab roofing, that's just a flat roof, so architectural shingles is what she gave us this picture of as architectural shingles.
In the proposal, it says architectural.
Okay.
So I
As
think,
long as it stays with that.
well, that's what we would be approving.
Okay, so okay as architectural shingles as proposed.
Okay.
Rewrite it my first time was terrible handwriting. I would go read it tomorrow. Okay. So the door. What I'm hearing there is that it should be repaired or replaced like for like.
Be custom anyway.
The proposal is kind of modified from the original. And I think what we can do is make a motion at the end saying, yeah, we agree with this, because otherwise it'd be a nightmare to track. So.
Yeah.
So are you okay with that? And then, are you okay that being a condition without further review? Should be pretty obvious.
Straightforward, yeah.
Walk by.
So just take the,
Some of us drive by multiple times a day, so.
you just take the question mark off of that.
And I suppose if there's, you know, if there turns out to be some sort of deep complication and problem with. If it's irreparable and replacement is complicated, we can come back and talk about it in the future, but I. Don't think that's gonna be the case.
It's actually a pretty plain door.
Right, right.
Double glass and
Yeah,
dark.
it's, I think if the glass gets saved, that's the hard part, right?
Okay. Safety rail for front porch. It sounds like there is some inclination to allow connection to the box posts.
So I think the way I would be inclined to phrase that is that is all good, as long as we're using, again, historically appropriate materials. I mean, because you could put, if you just say safety rail, that could be all kinds of things.
Yeah, well, they're proposing this large timber.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm just, again, I'm thinking of a scenario where someone else does it.
Not irreversible.
And yeah, whatever.
And this is something that you would not want or desire additional review.
That's fine.
No.
Do we not, if she's not the owner? Yeah, I'm for,
That's why I wanted to specify, it's gotta be certain material standards.
for the review, because if she's not the owner, then.
Can we stipulate that it's for this applicant?
Yeah, can we require a review if someone else
Because it runs
does
the
it?
land, right?
It normally does, I mean. You could,
I mean, I'm comfortable with that.
Again, what we'd be approving is what the proposal is. Even if it switches over to a new owner or a different owner,
But if
everything
somebody
else,
comes with her
it's
package,
still only,
yeah, so we would, so let's say they like, well. We won the lottery, we're moving to Switzerland. And then, you know, John Doe comes in and, oh, we're cool looking house.
safety
We're
road.
gonna do something. And then, well. The Historic Landmarks Commission approved the historic resource review. You wanna put those rails on? That's what they want. If you wanna change it, you gotta go before them again.
That sounds fine, yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
We would just, I think, probably emphasize the as proposed by the applicant.
Yes.
Conditions.
Yeah, it doesn't give you carte blanche to do anything. you
As
want
a side
to.
note, for other applicants, I mean, a sample picture, very helpful.
Yeah.
So we're all thinking of the same stuff.
Okay, then the safety rail around the parking area,
We talked about that.
we did.
He said just don't attach to the house.
don't attach it to the building,
Well,
and
it's just that railing going down. You got it wrong. Yeah, okay.
I'm assuming
It's
that.
not the railing around the deck, that's just the railing for that stair.
Yeah, it's upstairs. Yeah, it's not around the parking area. In the parking.
Okay, no attachment to the building,
But around.
siding. So. Here's what I kind of gathered from the conversation. If obviously you're okay with removal of the vinyl. Yes, I think that's a given. And if not like for like, and this condition would still, that's in black, would still be there. But if not for like, prior to final siding replacement, except for temporary work to prevent further damage or decay, the final plan shall be presented to the Historic Landmarks Commission for review and approval.
It was interesting, the neighbor that identified the siding was pretty good shape.
Yeah, so
Need a name for that, I remember it too.
Exciting if it's all just under there, that would be cool.
yeah, hopefully, yeah, all the word is for
I'm sure it'll still be good.
And then the foundation. Now, we know there is gonna be a building permit for that. So we could just keep the hand condition in there deteriorated exterior foundation, that's in bold, purposely because we're worried about the appearance, shall be repaired rather than replaced, with severity of deterioration requires replacement of distinct features. Those shall match the old design color, et cetera, where possible. Now, maybe you want that final plan or not, I guess that's a question for you. We could word it similarly to the siding. But there will be a building permit, so we'll have a chance to look at it.
I don't want to play structural engineer, but could we say something that if possible, that the repairs be hidden from view or minimized from view or something like that?
I mean, that's consistent
The
with,
proposal that you presented was great.
yeah, that's consistent with,
Well, John Doe comes in and he gets a different one. But this or something weird. It's necessary just because that's what they do.
Sure.
I'll say that.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about this applicant.
Yeah.
People to come after.
so to be interior,
Pretty close here. The new feature shall match the old design texture where possible. Or minimize the view from the outside or from viewing points.
yeah, minimize exterior visibility of,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great, yeah.
that's not really emphasized.
I'm so excited, and like, those are the words right there.
Oh, I wish I could snap like that.
Say minimize exterior visibility.
Yes.
Fingers on
Good
this.
stuff. It surprised me as well, I wasn't exceeded my own expectation.
Okay, so we'll make a motion to accept as presented with the changes as worked out individually.
I will second that motion.
I have so much to make a motion, I can't.
I thought, well, then I will move to accept this with the modifications that we've made.
I'll take a motion.
Wonderful.
Yeah, how do you vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
And motion for signature.
So moved. Seconded.
Vote. You vote?
Yep. Aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so before the final written decision of the planning commission may be appealed to the city council, the notice of decision will be mailed to all persons who justify to submit comments, and the appeal deadline will be included in the notice. Hope you end up getting the property.
Good luck.
And so you understand that last part, so the motion for signature is we will whip up the final document. We'll call the chair up to have it signed, and then the decision gets sent. As opposed to waiting for the entire body to review that final decision at the next meeting, which is adds time.
Well, let's make sure he's honest and did the change as well.
Yeah. And in 17 years, they haven't accused me of that yet, so.
Okay, thank you. Hey, I have a question with the last hearing, because I didn't make a motion to sign. Was that a recommendation of city council? Was that our decision?
We need a motion at that.
No, we did not.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's not too late, because it didn't matter that the hearing is closed, we could go back. Make a
Okay.
motion.
So does someone have a motion for?
We made a motion to not, to deny, you still.
We still have to do findings and the decision needs to be signed by the chair. Yeah, so that's a good point, Dan. We should,
So a motion for me for the chairperson to sign the conversation. That's
variance.
very.
So moved.
Yeah.
I vote.
Aye.
Aye.
I inadvertently skipped that.
Thank you. Well, I was just chatting with Jacob briefly about this next item. There's sort of this assumption that if we deny the variance, the development proposal kind of has to go back to square one a bit. And so I don't want to waste everybody's time and review architectural compliance. We had it on the agenda to sort of streamline their process. But at this point with denial, it's not going to be streamlined anyway. So
Well, and he left.
that is true. We typically don't have an applicant presentation. Well, we have, I guess, you know, Holcomb's come and done.
Yeah, because Holcomb came and he talked about what he was doing.
I was prepared to talk about this today, and maybe this information will be repurposed into a new application or something like that, but at this point, I don't think it's really worth getting into. So if you're comfortable delaying this
That makes sense.
to another time, I think that's fair.
You have to move to remove it from the agenda though.
No, I don't think so, because we didn't advertise for a certain public hearing time or anything like that. There's no legal obligation that this is reviewed at this time.
It's a discussion item, not a decision.
Yeah, it's a recommendation for staff. And we don't have an application before us, so there's not some, like a sense of urgency.
It's like both of these parts were ahead of the other part. I mean, we talked about like there was other decisions they need to have made for with it.
Yeah, I just remember in the pre-app, it was sort of my recommendation that, oh, you're going before the commission with a variance, you may want to also streamline the process and have architectural stuff be reviewed, you know, your application's pretty far along anyway. So I just remember making that suggestion, and I don't think they would have thought of it originally, so.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So I'm like, God, are they gonna be mad at me? Because it was about having a roadmap, you know, to continue.
Since we're on the subject of, you know, the historic review and all that, as I stated last time about a discussion about these, variations that we give on these, so we can get a little more standardized. It seems kind of haphazard to me, get on a discussion sometime in the future.
Variances, you mean?
Yeah, well, all these are applied, because I mean, if I was going through an application and I was denied, I'd be trolling through every one of these decisions and say, you did it here, you did it here, you did it here. So I just want to be consistent, so.
It's usually a range. It's usually a range. He's talking about like when we give people a variance on setbacks or on parking spaces. What's the guidelines? What is a large variance? What is a small variance? How do you decide?
What
How do you-
I'm talking about is actually when we're talking, the historic homes,
Oh,
if we allow them to do one thing and somebody else might say, you know, you did that for them. That's all, I'm just looking for.
So for example, saying you could replace instead of repair, you could have some guidelines so people.
Or you can have a window here and somebody else say, well, why can't I have a window?
Yeah, I think one thing we've thought of in the past is that the State Historic Preservation Office offers trainings to commissioners who maybe don't have a lot of experience applying historic guidelines. And it's something that would be a free thing we can offer. It's something we can look into. We've done it in the past. I don't know if you have thoughts about that, but it's kind of just.
Well, what I'm thinking is that, you know, some of these are hard and fast rules and we give variations to. And so then I'm thinking, you know, why here and then not here? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's your discretion because it's your decision. I don't think there's any mandate that you treat every single application identically. Like there are different circumstances for each application.
I think you have to.
right, but see, there's every every building is different, every exposure is different. And so you have to give, it's like contributing, non-contributing.
Well, it's messy.
Yeah, it's like, can you see this much of the building or can you see the whole building? You know, it's all relative.
With institutional knowledge though, or.
Right.
You know,
That's what I've
going
got,
through
Jen.
hearings and stuff, you know what we've done in the past, like, for instance, on the railings and things. When Erin came through and we were very specific on what we wanted on her railing to her house, you know, like. So, I mean, I totally understand what you're saying, Scott,
But one thing that was helpful to me
window thing, but.
is Jacob, when I sat in Mark's place, correct name, when I sat in his place, he had me and the youth council drive around and we actually have a list of all of the designated landmarks. And so the kids and I drove around all of them and took pictures of all of them and just looking at them and getting a feel for what the inventory is and what's delineated. And then that kind of put my head in a better space of the range of what's out there. And then I know kind of what to aspire to
Yeah, I mean, I think I went immediately to workshops and free trainings because I think it's a familiarity with these applications in general that you're kind of asking for is like that comes with time and experience and wisdom that you're first talking about. You look like you were about to talk, but stop.
Well. So we need to be consistent. The thing is, when we're talking about historic preservation, there's a little more room for discretion. And that's built into the law, because when we're dealing, if this was a home and it wasn't historic. State says we have to be clear and objective with our standards, but some of the exception is that is for historic. And my comment on the workshop is that's my frustration about how much stuff's going on. And it's just time, and it's been a frustrating issue for a long time. They've talked about these trainings when we have, so every 4 years, SHPO does a review of us as a certified local government. It's happened several times, and they talk about the training. It's just like going to a conference. You get excited about stuff, you come back to your desk, you look at everything, and you say the F word. Just because, where's the time?
Right, but that one thing that I went to with Main Street, that they had that guy from this old house or something. And he's overwhelmed with his work. I'm a volunteer. I'm like, wow. You know, it was cool to me. As I mean, nowadays, since post-COVID, a lot of those things might be available Zoom wise or virtually that we could access as our time saw fit if we chose to do so. That wouldn't involve taking staff time, but it would be one more tool that you could bring back to the group.
And I'm not saying I'm against it at all. I think it's great. But there's just a lot of ideals. It's just not an ideal situation. You look at the budget, arguments about who's important, all that kind of number two stuff that's happened. And looking at the best practices under those circumstances, it's this. Because I think about this all the time, almost daily, and it's this constant. These constant opposing forces.
Yeah, I'm coming from an approach that wouldn't be a burden on staff. You know, if someone could come and just give a presentation to you all and maybe provide an hour session training or something, you know, something like that. I'm always on the lookout for that. Like I'm on their email lists, and if they offer them, I'm on to Jacob, like, hey, we should do this.
And
Zoom or
There's a
Staff meeting.
recorded thing.
Zoom or YouTube or something like that.
Historic Oregon has a
We just,
curriculum
there's
that's
so much going on that it's not really top of our list, you know. I think we're also getting more historic resource reviews than we've ever had.
to look at, right? Yeah.
So I've got a question.
Resource Reviews, these applications we're getting more of than we've had.
What's happening no longer.
Way too many conversations going on. Yeah. I do have a question. So the last one we just did I understand correctly that it's a secondary significant historic house? And I was wondering, I didn't think those even came before the historic.
Contributing and non-contributing are just a timeline, it's just a date.
Secondary and primary significance are what you're talking about.
His primary is pre-fire, secondary is post.
That's because it's
Yeah.
in the city landmark, which is unfortunate, because if you think about what's going on your street, basically, she had to come before us, but
It's a shit on
to build those modern houses in the middle of the historic district, and then the little building that he's talking about, that they're putting T111 on, we have no say in it. It's like if we could be consistent in the boundaries of the district and do some preservation and try to
I've
protect.
given Jacob some
Like that little-
ammunition on that, but.
That little building made the rounds in town. It used to sit right next to my building right there. It was John Foot's office. He was the district attorney. And there's some evidence that it might have been in a second location, and that was Edith's Beauty Shop down where it is now. And it should not be allowed to have T111 siding on it.
I'll bring it to my backyard. I could have done it for free.
They did put in new structural beams, or not beams, but posts.
Like it's all so spotty, it makes no sense.
Right, there's no continuity.
And there's no consequence to opening a building up and letting it rot because you really want it to.
Right,
Which didn't turn out to be in their favor.
yeah.
I mean, the applicant didn't participate in that, but the owners, in my opinion, specifically opened that up so that it would rot, so that they would get permission to demolish it. The same thing's gonna happen with the Ross House, and the same thing is gonna continue until
The Ross House.
it's the blue one that keeps.
The one down on the end of First.
The first hospital in Allen's.
Oh,
Way.
Yeah, there was a
See,
hospital.
building. Can I segue to something else too?
we have other agenda items.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Want to make sure we do what steps wants us to do.
On road.
Yeah, there's not huge stuff
A
left.
lot. You have anything to talk about in the planning activity report? Thank you for bringing that into the conversation.
Not really. I think I mentioned this before, but in the report, I talk about the police station decision. The council ultimately, were in a position to have to deny it. Just because of how Luba works and everything, which I'm sure wasn't comfortable for them. So that site is kind of kaput at this point, so that's the main thing I'd have to say in the meeting.
Well, what was the site design review and the funding? Just a-
That's the elevator that you looked at?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the elevator and the foundation work and the porch expansion.
Okay,
And well, yeah, there's a parking lot improvement associated with it that's outside of your review, but
nothing new for us.
it's all the stuff that.
We have, and this might be not appropriate question, but I think I remember that when we approved the food cart to be at Crooked Creek, that was time limited.
Yes,
And then they got a kitchen.
Yes, and then they applied for an extension because their kitchen still is not, so they applied for another year.
Okay, and then I heard, just gossip, I heard on the street they wanted a second food cart, so maybe that was not correct.
So they didn't apply for a second.
Maybe it was just a renewal people were confused by. You know, it's not a new food cart.
They
It's just a
agreed the
keep
same
over.
thing, but I talked to the applicant, and he applied for just one, and that's what we've.
I've been misunderstanding.
All right.
When you hear these things out there in the community and you're sitting on planning commission, I want to make sure I have it accurate.
You're the rumor stopper.
Yeah, I might go in. It's the river stopper. I don't read that stuff.
Corrective items? Did you have anything?
My only thought on that was, I've had a couple. Planning commissioners approach me about maybe heading. Committees since they can't and don't want to do all of them.
Yes, I know.
Don't know if it's.
You were proactive.
I thought Beacon Storefront went to the Main Street people.
The mayor said that if we were going to. Move forward with that, he strongly suggested that we coordinate with Main Street. Now, Main Street is getting defunded in the budget, what, right? They didn't get any money?
I don't think that's the case.
So they'll be around. I was gonna ask you about that because if we don't have Main Street, we don't have any grants doing that are historic. But
Yeah, I think-
in the past.
I.
So,
So my suggestion would be, I don't know if during a meeting, we wanna pick heads of different committees. I'd like to take the plaza one. On the architectural standards, to me, it. As I said before, they got kind of clouded and there were former commissioners that wanted to go across the entire city, which I don't think makes sense. I'd like to see that. In the beginning, start with
There were.
Pick a district.
Old Town, like
Yeah.
historic district and maybe. Go
Yeah,
from
maybe.
there, yeah, so. Vacant storefronts, I had a discussion with Erin, who is. With Main Street and she hasn't had time, nor have I had time to move forward on that at this point.
so my understanding for the joint meeting tomorrow, these are some of the things that. I want to talk about, just wanted to make sure we were kind of prepared to talk about.
Yeah. And that's 4 p.m. tomorrow?
What's the other agenda items?
So, yeah, so the joint meeting tomorrow, the main items,
Ready for that?
the first one. Is our economic opportunities analysis. So our consultant, Eco Northwest, will be here to talk about the initial phase of that. That's anticipated to be an hour. And so for the second item, just by default, we just put proactive items, in case, y'all want to discuss those.
Something the council asked, because they were, go into it.
No, there was no specific, council
Okay.
request. That just seemed, well, it's the proactive item, those are things we should talk about, so.
So there's an hour tomorrow dedicated to.
Is that part of the committee that I volunteered?
Yeah, I'm sure that was, yeah.
So the technical advisory committee for the economic opportunities analysis, it will meet separately.
But that's the same issue, at the
It is
same
the
time.
same plan. Yep. And there will be a meeting in July, I think mid-July was the date.
Is that committee gonna come before us first, before they go to, it seems like it's a planning thing, so it should come to planning first before it goes to the city council, is that?
For adoption, that's correct.
What are we gonna say about other proactive items? What are you guys doing,
Like, I mean, you kind of teed up the plaza brick thing, I thought in the last city council meeting, it seems like when I was listening to that, you had kind of brought that to their attention.
Yeah, because it was the newest one and we chatted about it a little bit, I did mention, some of the considerations and that it was a new item. And so at least it's something we can look at right there.
There's a plan that was referred to me by, whenever I talked about it when I was on council. Former counselor says, we have a plan, there's a book on the shelf, it's all about the plan for that plaza. That was done long before I was a city councilor.
Did it involve pavers?
Yes.
Really?
I saw a newspaper article and a pretty watercolor rendering. That's all I've seen.
And
I heard about it.
described it as a book.
People that I heard about it from, and I have never seen a plan. I have only seen a newspaper article and a pretty watercolor picture,
Beautiful red,
not a plan.
not unlike the mountain that existed in front of the fire station.
Yes.
What?
The newspaper article?
No picture. But I've seen that picture too, and it's like, I wonder where it was.
The historical society has a bunch of watercolors that
Maybe
somebody drew up for a lot of the buildings.
Well, SDAT did some stuff in 2015, the Sustainability Design Assessment Team, and those were watercolor, but.
Right, but I was gonna, yeah, that was way before that.
Like 2011, like.
I think even before that.
Yeah, I came to.
It predates me.
Well, you brought in that picture
But
way
we have
back,
a digital version of it.
which I thought was really cool.
And I don't think it was specific to the plaza. It talked about the roads around it,
They
that
talked
stuff.
about the whole thing was gonna be a gathering place.
I think the context of what's being discussed now in that plan.
It's narrower.
It's an apple and orange comparison.
Okay,
Like, it's a great idea, but I don't think that there's anything that's usable from it.
okay. I just thought somebody had an idea at one point. It would be like, now what do we do 20 years later?
Well, I think we've got some ideas, and again, going back to the picture that.
Yeah, we came across that.
Oh, yeah.
It has a picture of the plaza and it shows, well, it's an aerial. And it shows.
It's a great start.
Configuration.
It looks like it would-
In the fountain.
Writing that we can't say.
Oh, I've seen that picture.
The X shape.
Yeah.
Within the plaza, see, I remember the X shape, that, pavers, do you keep the trees or not, and acceptability. The good thing about the plaza is we can see it and it's not this huge list.
It's so relatable.
Oh my God, so.
Said it was a nice little project.
Well, and as Mr. Preheim has pointed out, it does serve a great purpose for a large number of people in the area.
It could be a vehicle for economic development in a way.
Well, again, I think it's
Together.
easily funded by private citizens. Who doesn't want a brick with their name on it in the middle of Halloween Town?
Hell, I might buy one.
Even Halloween Town people,
Yeah, exactly.
not just community.
Oh, yeah, no, a bunch of people would buy this.
I think because of its smaller scale, it's a good project for the council and planning commission to jointly get their hands dirty.
And you would be making a proposal to the county on that, right? Or no, is it to the
They
city?
own the property, yeah. So there's layers to the onion of who you're working with, yeah.
Would you like to get the council excited about that?
Sure, we can talk about it more.
Okay.
Just having that photo, we can pull it up. If you email it to me, I can pull it up.
Just, That's something we can get our head around a little bit right now, and the others for depending on Main Street and we're a little fuzzy on the first one. We need more refinement.
And, you know, that may be something that you need more staff help on,
The other items.
once we get, you know, once that gets closer to the queue, as I like to say.
We plan maybe on the next meeting that anybody interested can pitch the commission on being the chair, or I mean, I think there are things to discuss. Who wants to be the chair of these subcommittees? Does a subcommittee only can have people on the commission, or will we let citizens input on those subcommittees? Are we gonna take testimony from the public, which I think we should do?
Well, I think the committee can draw from whatever sources, you're just making a recommendation.
I'm just thinking,
Right.
HB 3115, it ended up being just commissioners, and I think that it should be more input from community.
It's supposed to be bigger than that at the outset, and then they go, that.
Yeah. So you call it that.
I was wondering if, how would you, I wanted to bring something up, in the agenda item, or, you know, it's just something I've been kicking about. And, I'm gonna ask the commission's permission if I can look into it a little closer. What I was thinking about, because of last time when we had the, port, property where they're doing the maintenance shed, and I brought up about the archaeological condition. Something, I'd like to try to do something about conditionalizing public land in St. Helens archaeologically, to see if, you know, if there's anything of interest that might be such as this, you know, like this other, this annexation that we had, you know, to do something like that. John, on the waterfront, before this all kicked off, he did add something done archaeologically. I offered my services gratis, but he already had something in place. So I was just wondering if I could, you know, try to look into that without not really being formal. I just didn't want to step on any toes or, you know, anybody, you know, come back at me. What are you doing?
You want to bring it back to the commission just to talk about it? or-
Yes, I'll continue talking about it. Maybe it can develop into something more.
What's your problem with that? That's kind of where we set up the proactive items.
I don't want to get that formally.
Right, but we have to start with a little bit of conversation
Yeah,
first.
yeah, that's what I'm trying to,
Exactly.
that's what I'm initiating.
I think if it lived in for your information items until
Yeah.
it elevates, that
Yeah.
okay, unless someone objects to that.
And you've seen how these meetings go, sometimes they're longer than others, and maybe there's not a time, not appropriate time in
Yeah.
the meeting, maybe there's only an hour, you know.
I understand. I want to take a couple minutes. So I can-
You can do enough meetings that you can go on.
Well, this is the space. It's like, I heard this around town. Oh, speaking of around town. Oh, I saw a bunch of piles of stuff before being loaded. Like, you know where the leaf is? And then there's that wetland.
She says,
Right behind those trees, there's a big giant pile of stuff being loaded and stacked back there. One of my clients goes, wait, go slower, go slower, go slower, and I had to go really slow to look between the trees to see that somebody is. It's like somebody's clearing somewhere and making a pile of trees and junk,
Oh, is it trash or is it just they're foresting, like they're?
rusty stuff.
Where?
It's like, you know, how there's broadleaf and then there's the wetland and then there's those trees before you get to those. Industrial properties, behind those trees, because there's a thick row of trees, and I knew there was a homeless camp back there, that's what I thought he was pointing out. But no, there's a big pile of,
we just had a hearing on that.
so I didn't know if there was something going on or if it's just somebody doing stuff.
The pink house, you, is that far down?
You're not that far down.
No, it's, I know the clearing you're talking about, I've noticed it, and it's a property that, I think I remember the owner saying something about some clearing going in there.
I just, sometimes people like sneak stuff around. Sometimes people move stuff around without everybody actually knowing, and I don't know how wetland adjacent that is. Cause it is right on the other side.
Can remove vegetation, you know, where to look for
Oh, can you stack it up however you want?
it. And stack it up, we got to fill.
Well, this is like, it's a stack.
And
Not
that
the removal, I'm not seeing a vacancy. I'm
hasn't
seeing a
been
stack.
delineated there.
I was just curious if that what's happening, and then if people ask me about Dairy Queen.
But I'm not the boss of this county anymore, so.
Dairy Queen submitted their building permit. The building permit plan package was the same plan set that was submitted for the land use decision. Land use decision had several conditions of revision, none of which were adhered to. And so when we received that building permit, we the status, additional information needed. I've been told that that is almost done and will be here soon. And that was many weeks ago.
So nothing is inked or changed.
Yeah, they're still there, there's still
Still in the
movement. But it is molasses, not flowing water.
Okay.
Has Holcomb submitted any building permits yet? Is this grant running out? How long do they have on that? Couple of years, right?
And I don't know, and there's probably extensions available, I don't know, Main Street manages them. I could ask, but it's really not, cities.
Did everybody hear about in the newspaper, the money that Habitat got in Scappoose? And $260,000 or $280,000 in infrastructure grants to begin a 10-home project. On off Myrtle Street, close to City Hall there. They got land from CAT. And they're gonna be townhomes kind of ish. And it'll be multi-phase, but it will house 10 families eventually. And they are working in Vernonia currently. And then they are taking applications on a lot that was gifted to Habitat in St. Helens. And they're getting plans together for a very small building envelope.
Yeah, there's sewer infrastructure.
Yeah, it's a really tiny building envelope that they're having to tweak, but it's just been, the experience of working with Habitat has been very rewarding for me. And is just kind of makes you see economic disadvantage differently, home ownership differently. It's just, you look at equity and inclusion in a whole different light when you talk about the right for people to be housed. But it's just, I just consider it as very rewarding work for me. And the fact they're willing to train me and send me and do all these things. I just think that Scappoose and Vernonia, it's just a lot of movement, for Habitat. And they just celebrated just last week or week before 25 years in our community. And it was Jennifer Anderson was instrumental in the plan and pulling all this together. And getting them to increase capacity, because that's the number one goal of Habitat right now is they can't move as fast as the need. And that's globally. And this isn't an Oregon problem, it's not a Portland problem, it's a global.
Do my part, it's shop at the restore.
There you go. And then one little tidbit, I took pictures and put it online, and mostly for Dan. That wetland over there, they planted that because I have clients over there at Broadleaf. And they have planted all that wetland with all native plants, and all those flowers are starting to come into bloom along that little trail. And Portland State came out and did an art project with the youth, and they painted the main intersection, and it looks like beehive with flowers in the middle, and it was all done by the children.
That's right.
So it's this huge.
Is it by the community center, the intersection meeting?
Yeah, and so it's all yellows and oranges and hot pinks, and it was just multi-age, multi-ethnicity that all went together to do this project. And it's like, you don't get happy news about anything. And it just kind of, for me, when I saw it, it's like, what a great show of humanity. Because it's a place that you don't expect art. It's a happy thing.
Did you have any information items?
We beat it to death.